Chapter 3038. When Muyaja walked in after changing his clothes, he saw her lying on the bed. Because she had struggled, her face was extremely haggard, her hair was disheveled, and her clothes were disheveled. He was stunned for a few seconds before he reacted. He walked to her side and held her hand tightly, his heart aching for her. Yin Shishir called out his name in pain. Muyaja, I'm here. Hubby, I'm here. Hubby, I'm in so much pain that I can't take it anymore. Muyaja's heart ached terribly. What do you mean you can't wake up? My wife can do it. I don't want to give birth anymore. Boo-hoo. Yin Shishir was utterly defeated. Muyaja's eyes were red with heartache. He turned around and grabbed the nurse. My wife said she doesn't want to give birth anymore. She's in so much pain. Is there any way? The nurse said, wait a moment. Then she turned around and left. After a while, the nurse came back with a delivery ball. It was about half the height of Yu Yu's body. It was very elastic and looked like a bigger yoga ball. She said, help your wife sit on this ball and weigh a few times. This will help open the cervix. Muyaja nodded and helped Yin Shishir sit on the delivery ball. He supported her body and supported her steadily. If it were in the past, this would be too childish and he would never do it. But now, he was willing to pay any price to help her get rid of her suffering. Yin Shishir was tormented by wave after wave of excruciating pain. This time, the pain wasn't like before. It was as if two of her bones were being separated bit by bit. She was in so much pain that she desperately grabbed Muyaja's arm. Her other hand was like a cat, desperately scratching whatever she could reach. Muyaja looked at her frantic expression, and his heart ached so much that he almost suffocated, especially when he saw that her nails were broken and embedded in her flesh because of her scratching. His heart ached even more. He suddenly stretched out his arm and said, if it hurts, bite me. Don't torture yourself like this. Yin Shishir hugged his arm, feeling wronged. She opened her mouth and bit him, but she couldn't bear to use force. When the nurses saw this scene, especially when they saw the heartache in Muyaja's eyes, they felt warmth in their hearts. Many husbands had accompanied their wives to this delivery room before, but most of them stood there like a block of wood. Among them, there were even some men who were impatient and full of complaints. When dealing with their wives, they did not have anything good to say to comfort them. They only said, bear with it, bear with it. During the delivery, many men were stunned by the scene. Some of them couldn't accept it and ran out. But this man was different. His heart really ached. Gradually, Yin Shishir felt that she couldn't take it anymore and wanted to lie down on the bed. The nurse came over to take a look and said that it was about time. So, she helped her lie down on the bed. Lying on the delivery bed, the pain engulfed her all of a sudden. Yin Shishir felt as if she was struggling on the sea and was about to drown. Wave after wave hit her, and the whole world was spinning. Harder! The nurses rushed up and surrounded Yin Shishir nervously. Muyaja held her hand tightly by the bed and encouraged her. Shishir, you can do it. You're almost out. As he said this, he followed the nurse's instructions and stuffed a piece of chocolate into her mouth. Chapter 3039. At midnight, after 4 hours of torment in the delivery room, Gong Jie and the two little fellows were pacing around anxiously outside the door when they heard a long and crisp cry coming from the delivery room. Gong Jie was so shocked that he rushed to the door and looked inside excitedly. Soon, a nurse walked to the door and said with relief, it's done. It's done. Mother and daughter are safe. Mother and daughter are safe. Wow. Sister. Sister is out. The Mu family's beloved little princess had finally arrived in this world under everyone's anticipation. Gong Jie was so excited when he heard this that he immediately hugged Yu Yu and Xiaoyi Chen. He was as happy as a child. Yu Yu was overjoyed. Uncle's beloved niece is finally here. Uncle has been waiting for a long time, but it's not in vain. When Yin Shishir was pregnant, Gong Jie often video called her across the ocean. He was also having fun. Like Muyaja, he said to her stomach in all seriousness, Yueyao, it's Uncle. We'll be able to see each other in a few months. Uncle will be waiting for you. Therefore, when he knew that Yin Shishir was about to give birth, Gong Jie immediately flew over. Unfortunately, Yin Yeqing could not be present at such an important moment. He could not walk and could not leave the breathing mask. Therefore, it would be difficult for him to see this scene with his own eyes. Xiao Shui was also very excited. She hugged Hua Jin without reservation and laughed heartily. Hua Jin waited silently at the door for a long time. He finally heaved a sigh of relief when he learned that the mother and daughter were safe. "Oh my, it's a little princess. She's so beautiful." The nurse carried the baby, wiped his body clean, pressed his footprints, and weighed him. After a series of examinations, the baby was very healthy. He opened his two chubby little paws and cried loudly. His voice was clear and loud. She was placed in a swaddle and carried to the man who was waiting by the bed. After giving birth, Yin Shishir was exhausted. Her clothes were wet with sweat. Muyaja's heart ached for her. He kept kissing her and smiling, but his eyes couldn't help but become wet and red. "Shishir, I love you." He kept kissing her, but he didn't get tired of it. Yin Shishir didn't have the strength to respond, but she heard his mellow voice choking with emotion. Her nose was also a little sore. "I love you too." Muyaja sighed in his heart. Gestation is such a miraculous thing. He had once again created a cute little life with her. Unlike her first pregnancy, this time, he had been by her side the entire time. And the most fortunate thing was that he had witnessed this moment with his own eyes. Thank God, mother and daughter are safe. "Sir, look, your daughter is so beautiful." He was just born, but he has a head of shiny black hair. Muyaja immediately and carefully took the child from the nurse's arms. He finally saw the little guy who had been in her stomach for more than 9 months. His expression was a little sincere and solemn, and even a little nervous. Although he usually looked like he was strategizing and always had a calm and composed face, when he carried the child, he was a little flustered, afraid that he wouldn't hold it well. Until a magical scene happened. For some reason, the child stopped crying when she was in his arms. Chapter 3040. Just like Xiao Chen, the newborn baby's face was red and wrinkled. The nurse said it was pretty, but he thought it was ugly. However, he knew that the baby had just been born and hadn't grown up yet. Just by looking at the baby's eyes, he knew that it would be very beautiful when it grew up. Like Xiao Chen, and also like Yu. However, the baby suddenly stopped crying. He looked up nervously and asked, "Why did she stop crying?" The nurse smiled and said, "This is the first time we've seen it. She was crying so much when she was in our arms." "Why did she stop crying when she was in your arms?" "Maybe the father and daughter have telepathy." "Don't worry, sir. We've done a checkup. The baby is very healthy." Muyaja's heart finally calmed down. It was a good thing that the baby was healthy. The more he looked at the chubby little angel in his arms, the more satisfied he felt. There was a doting smile in the corners of his eyes, and his expression relaxed a little. As he smiled, the baby's lips curled up slightly, as if she was smiling. He was surprised, so he carried the baby to Yin Shishir and said gently, "Honey, look, Yue Yao is smiling." Yin Shishir held onto the railing of the delivery bed weakly and sat up slightly. Suddenly, she smiled weakly and said, "I can't see." Muyaja felt a little upset when he heard that. "Can I touch her?" The nurse said, "Yes, you can." She reached out and touched the baby's lips. She was surprised when she touched the baby's lips. She's really smiling. Muyaja was worried that she wouldn't have the strength to sit up properly, so he carried the baby closer to her so that she could get closer to the baby. Yin Shishir's heart suddenly surged. When she first found out that she was pregnant, she was a little taken aback. She thought that having Yu and Xiao Chen around was enough to cause a ruckus. But when she saw this little guy with her own eyes, her heart was filled with endless emotions, and the corners of her eyes couldn't help but become moist. She suddenly felt that the pain she had suffered just now wasn't in vain. If her child could be born healthy, all the suffering she had suffered would be worth it. So cute. Her maternal instincts were stimulated to the extreme as she reached out to carry the child. Muyaja carefully watched over her and realized that, although she was exhausted, she was still able to hold the child steadily. This was probably the power of motherhood. "Yue Yao, you're finally here. Daddy and Mommy have been waiting for you for a long time." Yin Shishir said and gently kissed the corner of her eyebrows. She touched the baby's eyes and found that she couldn't open them. Her eyes were closed, and her eyelashes were long, thick, and slightly curled. In this aspect, she resembled her father a lot. In her warm embrace, the baby suddenly opened her mouth and moaned. Her little mouth moved a little, as if she wanted to suck on something instinctively. The nurse was amused. She's going to drink milk. Yin Shishir asked, "Can she eat now? There's no rush to feed her." The little guy is so obedient and doesn't make a fuss. There are so many babies who just came out, and they're crying so hard. She must take after her father in this aspect, right? Muyaja's face strangely turned red, and he smiled. He was actually shy. Don't say any more. Daddy is shy. Chapter 3041. Hubby, you're going to be a father again. He smiled, raised his hand, and gently caressed her cheek. Touched, he said, "My wife, it's been hard on you." "I won't." Yin Shishir lowered her head again and blinked. She wanted to see the little princess more clearly, but her vision was blurry. Even though she couldn't see, she felt more satisfied and happy with the child in her arms. As long as she can be healthy, I feel that all the pain and suffering is worth it. Are you tired? Why don't you rest for a while? Muyaja took the child from her arms, not wanting her to work too hard. Yin Shishir nodded and didn't force herself. She was happy that the child was born and wanted to hold it for a while longer. However, she was really exhausted after such an experience. Hence, she closed her eyes and fell asleep very quickly. When she woke up again, she had already been sent back to the ward. When she was awake, she heard Gong Jie and Hua Jin arguing. Yueyao was smiling at me. This means that my niece and I have telepathy, Hua Jin emphasized. Before you came over, when I held her little hand, she was already smiling. Shut up. It's true. You're being unreasonable. Do you believe that I'll beat you up? I do. Then tell me, who exactly was she smiling at? You. Gong Jie's domineering tone and Hua Jin's resentful tone formed a stark contrast. The child had already been sent to the room. Gong Jie and Hua Jin rushed over excitedly to see the little princess. Hua Jin was the first to go up and grab Yueyao's hand. In the end, just as Yueyao's lips curled up, Gong Jie came over and saw it. He was pleasantly surprised and said that his niece was smiling at him. Hua Jin emphasized that Yueyao was smiling at him, and he just happened to come over. The Gong Jie could not take it anymore. His face immediately darkened. Muyaja stayed by her bedside and held her hand. Although he wanted to be with his daughter, Gong Jie, Hua Jin, Yu, Xiao Yiqin, and Xiao Shui surrounded the little princess. With so many people accompanying the little princess, he felt sorry for his own woman and naturally wanted to protect his wife. For his little princess, his daughter had suffered so much. She was a daughter after all, so there would be a lot of time to accompany her in the future. But his woman had suffered so much, so he naturally had to take good care of her. Yin Shishir didn't open her eyes. She didn't have any strength, so she fell asleep again. Yu looked at the little princess and felt a little curious. Little sister's face is so wrinkled. Xiao Yiqin said, I was like this when I was born too. His face is so wrinkled and ugly. Yu gave him a sidelong glance. You've seen it before? Of course. Xiao Yiqin said, Daddy took a photo of me and even showed it to me. Oh, it's so disgusting. Hua Jin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How can you say that you're disgusting? But it's really disgusting, Xiao Yiqin said pitifully. Then he changed the topic and said proudly, but Daddy said that I was just born at that time and hadn't grown up yet. Aren't I still so beautiful now? Little sister is definitely prettier than me. Yu looked at him quietly from the side and then used his poisonous tongue. I hope little sister isn't as thick-skinned as you. Chapter 3042. You're the one who's not pretty. Hee. Xiao Yiqin was not angry. Instead, he retorted, We're twins. If you say that I'm not pretty, aren't you just indirectly saying that you're ugly? I'm more classy than you. I'm a little gentleman. I'm a little gentleman too. Gong Jie and Hua Jin stopped their bickering, but the two lads continued their debate relentlessly. Gong Jie shushed them. Keep your voice down. That's right. If the little princess wakes up, are you going to be responsible for feeding her? Xiao Shui said. Yu and Xiaoi Qin then tacitly shut their little mouths. Gong Jie said, "I want to hug her." Hua Jin said, "You can't hug her. If she wakes up, she'll really cry." Sure is still sleeping, and there's no one to feed her. Moreover, the nurse said that it's best to wait for the child to wake up naturally before feeding her. Xiaoi Qin said, when little sister was in mommy's stomach, she didn't drink milk for more than 9 months. Wouldn't she be hungry? Everyone was silent. This question also stumped Yu. Gong Jie couldn't answer it either. The group of people silently looked at Muyaja. Gong Jie said, "Brother-in-law, you're knowledgeable. Why don't you answer this question?" Muyaja felt like an old, bespectacled professor, and the group of people in front of him were all like giant babies. He ignored them. Everyone knew what was good for them. At this moment, Muyaja was guarding his wife. He couldn't be bothered with them. The group of people looked at the little princess fondly. In their eyes, the little Yao was like a little angel flapping her wings. Her entire body was glowing. Even though Muyaja sent people to guard the news of Yin giving birth and surrounded the hospital tightly, there were still many media outlets that rushed over. Ever since she became pregnant, because Muyaja was very protective of his wife, Yin disappeared from the public for a long time. Fans were curious and looked forward to hearing news about Yin. However, when the reporters rushed over, they were stopped by the bodyguards at the entrance. They were chased away by the bodyguards. Some of them insisted on going to the hospital, so the bodyguards smashed their cameras and chased them away. Muyaja's attitude was so rude and unreasonable because he did not want the little princess to be exposed to the public. He naturally wanted to protect his daughter well. These paparazzi were angry, but they did not dare to say anything. After all, the Xingyu Financial Group was so big, and they knew Muyaja's means. Naturally, they did not dare to say anything. Some good friends naturally came to the hospital to visit when they heard the news of such a joyous occasion. However, at this time, Yu and Xiaoi Qin were like door gods. No one could hug, kiss, or touch them. At most, they could only take a few glances and exchange a few pleasantries before leaving. When Qin Zhou rushed over, he was not even allowed to enter the door because the little princess was awake and Yin was breastfeeding her. He came in a hurry because he took time out of his schedule. He still had something to do and could not see so he could only leave a few words with Hua Jin and give his blessings before leaving. As soon as Qin Zhou left, Jiang Shun and Lu Jinyu came with fruits and some tonics. Just as they reached the door, they were chased away by Muyaja. Chapter 3043. Jiang Shun felt that it was unfair and complained to his boss. "Can't we even visit the little princess?" "That's right. You're her uncle, after all. Why should you visit her?" Muyaja glared at Jiang Shun and asked, "Has the acquisition of Solomon been settled?" Jiang Shun looked away guiltily. He then questioned Lu Jinyu. "Has the Central Jin Guangland auction been registered?" Lu Jinyu coughed and cleared his throat. Why aren't you getting lost?" Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shun wiped away their bitter tears and returned to the office with their arms around each other's shoulders. A week after Yu Yao was born, her face was no longer wrinkled like when she was just born. The little girl's face had already returned to its original color. It was white and tender, as if it could be broken by the slightest breeze. Sometimes, Yin would sigh with emotion as she hugged Yu Yao. This was probably bliss. However, there were also times when she felt blissful. For example, when she was breastfeeding, the little Yu Yao would snuggle in her arms and enjoy the milk. Perhaps because the little Yu Yao was extremely hungry, she would use a lot of force when she was suckling, as if she wanted to suck her entire soul away. Muyaja said that this girl was like a greedy little cat when she was suckling. Yin felt that it was especially so, but she was so happy and fierce when she was suckling. It was quite painful. Why was she so greedy? When Yu was suckling, she wasn't like her. She was very reserved and quiet. She wasn't so fierce. But then again, why else would there be a saying about using all the strength of suckling milk? This frankincense was quite magical for a baby in swaddling clothes. Every time she was breastfeeding, she would carry the crying baby into Yun arms. The little guy would almost instinctively burrow into her arms, accurately suckle his target, and then suckle hard. Yu said that she had seen a piglet sucking milk under an old sow's stomach on television. It was just like this. Although they did look alike. However, Muyaja was the first to disagree. Who are you calling a piggy? Who's the old sow? Yu smiled apologetically and turned to leave. This brat deserves a beating. Muyaja immediately coaxed her. Don't listen to him. You're not an old sow. She had originally thought that it was just a child's babble, but this man explained it seriously and even coaxed her. The more she listened, the more uncomfortable she felt. When she was breastfeeding, he was watching from the side. He was completely focused and did not take his eyes off her. He leaned very close to her and watched as the little princess's little mouth opened and closed. Unexpectedly, she also swallowed. Yin Shishir was shocked and asked, "What's that sound?" Why did it sound like he was swallowing his saliva? Muyaja snorted coldly, sounding displeased. Nothing. Seeing how the little Yue Yao was eating so well and was leaning on Yin Shishir's chest, occupying the spot that originally belonged to him, Muyaja felt a little uncomfortable. Fortunately, it was a daughter this time. If it was a son, he would feel even more indignant. However, was it because she was a little princess? He was happy to give her this privilege. Yin Shishir did not know whether to laugh or cry. What's the matter? Gluttonous. Yin Shishir blushed and couldn't help but push him. Hey, don't tell me. You want to drink milk too? Yes. Chapter 3044. Hey, don't be rash. You have such a big appetite. If you finish it all, what will Yue Yao drink? Puffed. He couldn't help but give in when he saw how serious she was. He scratched her nose lightly and said, I'm just teasing you. Yin Shishir laughed and said, I'm teasing you too. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. The deep love in their eyes couldn't be concealed at all. Outside the door, Yu and Xiaoyi-Chen were sitting on stools. Even though the two little guys were still young, Muyaja insisted that they stay away when Yin Shishir was breastfeeding. His attitude was not to be disobeyed. Yu said indignantly, Humph. Daddy is really narrow-minded. Xiaoyi-Chen said enviously, looking at little sister drinking milk, I actually feel that she's enjoying it. Poor me, I grew up drinking milk powder. Yu asked curiously, what milk powder did you drink? Xiaoyi-Chen shook his head. I don't know. I didn't know anything back then. I stopped drinking milk when I was 3. Oh, I'll ask Daddy later. Seeing that Yu was so insistent on knowing the brand of milk powder, Xiaoyi-Chen couldn't help but feel puzzled. You want to drink it too? No. Then why do you keep asking about the brand of milk powder I drink? Yu said seriously, if little sister drinks milk powder in the future, she won't drink this brand. Xiaoyi-Chen was shocked. Why? I suspect that you're so stupid because you drank this brand of milk powder. Xiaoyi-Chen was once again struck by Yu's venomous tongue. He slumped into the chair, unable to get up. However, after spending so much time together, Xiaoyi-Chen was already used to Yu's venomous tongue. He ignored Yu and clenched his little fist tightly as though he was making a vow. He encouraged himself and said, in the future, with a woman in our family, I must become stronger. Only then can I protect Mommy and my beloved sister. Yu said, you just have to be smarter. Don't drag your sister down when the time comes. Xiaoyi-Chen felt wronged and said, Yu, my heart hurts when you talk about your brother like that. Since you know that your brother is the oldest, it'll be embarrassing if little sister crushes your IQ in the future. Yu continued, in the future, when little sister goes to school, she'll come to you with her homework. If you can't answer the questions correctly, little sister will despise you. Little Li-Chen hummed an acknowledgement before saying, don't I have you? In the future, if little sister has a problem, she'll come to you. What about you? Yu looked at him with disdain. Me? Xiaoyi-Chen smiled proudly. If anyone dares to bully little sister in the future, I'll let them have a taste of my fists. Violent maniac. What else can I do? Xiaoyi-Chen put his hands on his hips indignantly. If little sister gets bullied outside, do you think she can rely on your fancy martial arts skills? Yu blushed guiltily. Indeed, his fists and kicks were no match for Xiaoyi-Chen's. He didn't know where Xiaoyi-Chen got his strange strength from. After feeding Yue Yao, little Yueyao settled down. Muyaja opened the door and let the two little guys into the room. Yu ran to the bedside excitedly. He straightened his neck and said, "Mommy, Mommy, I want to hug little sister." However, Muyaja said, "No." Chapter 3045. When Yu heard this, she pouted and said unwillingly, "Why? What if your arm can't hold little sister and she falls?" Xiao Chen came over and opened his arms. "Mommy, let me hold her. I'll hold her properly and not let her fall." Muyaja groaned, but did not reject him. Yin Shishir also trusted him. He was taller than Yu and would definitely be able to hold the little princess steadily. However, she was still a little worried and asked, "Do you know how to hold her?" Xiao Chen nodded vigorously. Yes, yes. The confinement nanny taught me. I learned it very seriously. The way to hold a child was also very particular. If the position was not right, the child would feel uncomfortable and cry loudly. Moreover, the bones of newborn babies were very soft. If one was not careful, it was possible to hurt the baby. Yin Shishir reminded him. Then you must be gentle and be careful. Okay. Xiao Chen immediately walked over and took little sister from Yin Shishir's arms with a sincere expression. Yu stared at them from the side. When she saw that Xiao Chen could be held, but she was not allowed to, she couldn't help but feel a little jealous. Biased. Daddy is biased. Mommy is biased too. He crossed his arms and sulked. He turned his head away and ignored them. Yin Shishir smiled helplessly. Then, she heard Xiao Chen suddenly whisper, "Little sister, open her eyes. She's looking at me." When Yu heard this, her anger immediately dissipated. She quickly went over and saw that the little princess, who was in Xiao Chen's arms, had suddenly opened her eyes. She had a pair of big, clear eyes. Her eyelashes were long and curly, and her eyeballs were as black and shiny as onyx. She blinked and clenched her little fists. As she looked at Xiao Chen, the corners of her eyes curved. Her cherry lips parted and revealed a bright smile. When Yu saw this, her heart almost melted. Her face flushed red, and she wished she could snatch little Yueyao into her arms and hug her properly. However, this was just a thought. Yin Shishir suddenly said, "Does this child really like to cry? I saw other babies cry in the middle of the night after they were born. But little Yueyao only cries when she's hungry." When the confinement nanny changed her diaper, she was also surprised. She said that it's a miracle that she was born to smile. Muyaja said, "Little Yueyao, Yu." Little Chen doted on her and carefully hugged her. However, to his surprise, little Yueyao reached out a chubby little paw and suddenly grabbed his collar. He did not know where she got her strength from, but she held on tightly. With a tug, her two little feet suddenly kicked as if she was excited. Yu's face flushed red when he saw how adorable little Yueyao was. He clamored for a hug and turned his head to plead, "Daddy, can't you let me hug her? I'll sit on the bed and hug little Yueyao carefully. She won't fall." When Muyaja saw that he really wanted to hug little Yueyao, he nodded and said, "Okay." Thus, Yu excitedly took little Yueyao from Xiao Chen's arms. He had learned how to carry babies from the confinement nanny, and he had learned it together with Xiao Chen. This was the first time he carried little Yueyao in his arms. She was so small and soft that he could not bear to use his strength. Chapter 3046. When little Yueyao saw him, she was also curious. She widened her eyes slightly and looked at him curiously. Yu gazed at her tenderly, his heart filled with tenderness. He had been looking forward to this little thing for a long time. He had always dreamed of having a younger sister and had been looking forward to it for a long time. He also had high hopes for Muyaja. Fortunately, his daddy had not let him down and had not made him wait for too long. His younger sister had been born for more than a week. Because she was sleeping most of the time, he rarely saw her open her eyes. Especially when she was smiling with her eyes open, it was very rare. Once, he heard his daddy mention that his younger sister loved to smile. When she smiled, her eyes would curve like two crescent moons. He was even more curious, but he never had the chance to see it. Even though his health was not good and he needed to rest recently and couldn't run much, he couldn't bear to go home when his younger sister was in the hospital. Every time he reluctantly went home and lay in bed, The image of his younger sister's young face would always appear in his mind. His heart felt so full, as if there was nothing filling it up. There was a voice that kept repeating, you finally have a younger sister. From now on, you must be the best brother in the world. Let your younger sister be the happiest sister in the world. When Yin Shishir was pregnant, he and Xiao Yichen wrote in their diaries seriously, looking forward to their younger sister's arrival day and night. When Jiangli came to visit Yin Shishir, she deliberately teased him and said, when you have a younger sister in the future, Daddy and Mommy will dote on her. They won't dote on you anymore. Now that the two-child policy was fully open, every family could have a second child. Jiangli also wanted to have a second child. She wanted to have another son so that she could have both a son and a daughter. However, when she accidentally mentioned this to her daughter was very resistant and said that she didn't want a younger brother or sister. If she had a second child, she would run away from home. Nowadays, the majority of people were only children. However, when the second child era came, many older children were very resistant to it. Originally, the family revolved around one person. If they had a second child, it would mean that the younger brother or sister would take away the love that originally belonged to them. Naturally, the eldest son was unwilling. However, Yu said, even if my younger sister is born, Mommy will still dote on me. Says who? Look, your younger sister is so cute. Your mommy loves her so much. From now on, her love will not only belong to you and Xiao Yichen. When Yu heard this, he smiled and said, if it's a younger sister, it's okay. He lowered his head and looked at the crib. His heart seemed to be filled with tenderness as he looked at the little life dotingly. He said softly, if it's a little sister, it's okay to share all the love that Mommy has for me with her. I will also pamper her and grow up with her. Jiangli looked at him in surprise, only to see the gentleness in his eyes. He was so touched by this child. She said to Yin Shishir, Shishir, you're so lucky to have these two considerate kids, and I'm so jealous of you. Yin Shishir was also very touched. She had asked Yu in private if he would be jealous if they revolved around their younger sister in the future. Chapter 3047. Yin Shishir's heart was filled with warmth when she heard these words. At that moment, Yu hugged his little sister. His heart was filled with emotions. Ever since his little sister was born, there had been constant changes. Even though these changes were minimal, in Yu's eyes, they were huge changes. Now, she was gradually growing up. He lowered his head and sniffed gently. The little one had a milky fragrance that was unique to babies. How fragrant! Could it be that he was like this when he was young? Yi was thinking about it. However, the moment he lowered his head, little Yao's nose suddenly wrinkled. Her beautiful eyebrows were tightly knitted together. A storm was brewing. Xiao Yichen noticed that something was wrong with her expression and exclaimed. In the next second, little Yao suddenly opened her mouth, straightened her throat, and started crying. Wah! Wah wah! Yu was startled by her crying. He looked at her, not knowing what to do. He didn't know why this little one was crying all of a sudden. Daddy, why is little sister crying? Muyaja walked over nervously. When he saw little Yao crying at the top of her lungs and her little face flushed red, he thought that she was feeling unwell. He was also puzzled. He asked, could she be hungry? Yin Shishir said strangely, she just breastfed. Why would she be hungry again? Xiao Yichen said, could it be that it's time to change the diaper? The confinement nanny said that if little sister pees, she will feel uncomfortable and cry. Muyaja placed little Yao on the bed. He took off the diaper and took a look. Her tender little but was clean. Xiao Yichen took a look and smiled. Has Daddy been changing little sister's diaper all this time? I see that Daddy's movements are very practiced. Yin Shishir said, Daddy only changes little sister's diaper occasionally. The confinement nanny is usually in charge. I think he's very skilled. Little Yao was still crying nonstop. Muyaja held him in his arms and tried all sorts of ways to coax him. He gently patted him, but the little guy didn't seem to give him any face. His little face was still wrinkled, as if he had been greatly wronged, and he cried even harder. Xiao Qin walked over and said obediently, "Let me sing for little sister. If my sister hears me sing, she definitely won't cry anymore." "Don't," Muyaja said nervously. "You're tone deaf. Don't scare your sister." Xiao Qin suffered another blow and found it hard to defend himself. Why was Daddy the same as you? They always liked to attack him. He was so sad. Just as Xiao Qin and Yu were feeling dejected, they heard Yun Shishir say, "It's probably because little sister recognized him. After all, this is your first time hugging her." Xiao Qin immediately said, "Little sister won't cry when she's in my arms. Could it be that Yu didn't hug her properly? How is that possible?" Yu was a little uneasy. He didn't know what was going on. Little sister was originally fine in his arms, but she suddenly started crying. He was a little worried. Could it be that little sister isn't feeling well? No way. It's probably because she recognized him. She'll be fine after some coaxing. Muyaja hugged Yueyao and coaxed him. However, the strange thing was that after a few coaxes, the little guy's crying gradually weakened. Everyone was amazed. Muyaja patiently coaxed him for a long time. The little guy lay in his arms, staring at him with tears in his eyes. However, he stopped crying. Even Yu was amazed. "Don't cry." Chapter 3048. "Daddy, let me hug her again. I haven't seen enough yet." Muyaja nodded. However, when Yu walked over and reached out his little hand, Yueyao's nose wrinkled again and she burst into tears again. Yu instinctively retracted his hand and hid to the side. He stared at her innocently, as if he had done something wrong. He pinched the corner of his shirt uneasily and looked a little lost. Muyaja looked at Yu's expression. For some reason, his heart ached. He immediately coaxed him and said, "Little sister wants to sleep. Is that so?" However, Yu still felt sad. Little sister didn't seem to like him that much. It was fine when Xiao Qin hugged her or when Daddy hugged her, but why did little sister cry so badly when it was his turn? He felt sad and a little disappointed. He sat by the window and watched helplessly. His heart ached so much that his eyes almost turned red. Muyaja finally coaxed little sister to sleep and placed her in the crib. Xiao Qin lay by the bed and watched. However, Yu didn't dare to go closer. He watched from afar, afraid that little sister would cry again if he went closer. Gong Jie and Hua Jin knocked on the door and walked in. Hua Jin held a box of food in his hand and said, "It's time to eat." While Yun Shishir was hospitalized, Hua Jin and Gong Jie stayed at the hospital every day. Yun Shishir's meals were all taken care of by the confinement nanny. Tonight, they specially made white crucian carp soup. It was said that drinking this soup would nourish qi, strengthen the spleen, clear the channels, and lower the breast. She drank it for 2 consecutive days and didn't feel anything special. However, there was indeed such a saying. As for Muyaja, Gong Jie, and the others, they naturally settled their own meals. If there were no special circumstances, Muyaja basically stayed close to her. When Gong Jie and Hua Jin went out to eat, they would bring back fast food for him. Sometimes it was a box lunch, and sometimes it was cooked by Hua Jin himself. Hua Jin's culinary skills were not bad, and Muyaja recognized it. Sometimes he would take the initiative to ask to eat Hua Jin's cooking. Yu sat at the table unhappily. She held her chopsticks and looked at the sumptuous dishes, but she had no appetite. Gong Jie saw this and couldn't help but scratch his nose. "What's wrong? Why do you look so glum?" "Uncle, will little sister cry when you hug her?" Gong Jie was a little confused. He raised his eyebrows and said, "No, Yueyao doesn't like to cry. She especially likes to laugh. Why are you asking this?" Yu then asked Hua Jin, "What about Uncle Hua Jin?" Hua Jin covered his face and said, "I haven't hugged her yet." He wanted to hug her too, but Muyaja and Gong Jie both disagreed. Yu was even more disappointed. "Little sister cries a lot when I hug her," Hua Jin remarked. "Isn't it normal for such a small child to cry and throw a tantrum? But everyone says that little sister loves to laugh and rarely cries. Why did she cry when she was in my arms?" Gong Jie rubbed his round face and said, "You could try again next time. Maybe little sister is sleepy and wants to sleep. A baby this big is especially sleepy." Don't think too much, okay? Oh, Yu had originally thought that this situation was probably just a coincidence, so he didn't think too much about it. However, he didn't expect that this situation would continue to happen. The next day, Yu went to the hospital. The confinement nanny had just changed the baby's diaper. He walked over and asked to hug little sister again. Chapter 3049. After receiving his permission, Yu was elated and carried Yao in his arms. However, the little thing was originally grinning from ear to ear. When she was carried in his arms, she did not react at first, but after a while, just like last night, a storm was brewing. She whimpered for a while, blinked her eyes, and 2 drops of tears fell. Her tears fell rapidly and slid down her cheeks. Her cries were earth-shattering as they escaped her little mouth from her throat. Yi was caught off guard. He watched as her little mouth opened wide. He could even see the quivering little tongue in the depths of her throat. Wah! The little one opened her mouth and cried earth-shatteringly. She even lifted her little leg and kicked his arm, as though she despised him. She used a lot of strength. Yu was in pain from the kick, but he didn't dare to let go, for fear that he would hurt his little sister in his arms. The confinement nanny hurriedly took the child from him and coaxed her for a long time. In the end, she still ended up in Yun Shirshir's arms. Only then did she stop crying. When Yu saw that this situation had repeated itself, he was extremely upset. He sat in a corner with his handsome brows slightly furrowed. Disappointment was written all over his face. Yun Shirshir couldn't see the disappointment on his face, but Mu Yaja could. He pulled him to the front of the room and stared at his face as he asked, "What's the matter? You don't look happy." "Daddy." Yu fiddled with his soft fingers, feeling aggrieved. His eyes suddenly reddened, and his voice became choked with sobs. He sounded as though he was about to cry. "Does little sister not like me?" Mu Yaja was stunned. He frowned and asked, "How could that be? Little sister must hate me. Otherwise, why would she cry whenever I hug her?" Yu sobbed as though he had suffered a great grievance. His tears fell instantly. He raised his hand and wiped away the tears at the corners of his eyes. He sniffled and was extremely upset. He rarely cried, and even more rarely showed such a helpless and flustered expression. He always had a calm and collected expression, probably because he was too sad, too upset, and also a little scared. His imagination was running wild, and he was worried that his sister really hated him, so he felt very wronged. Muyaja had never been good at comforting others. Seeing that little munchkin was so upset, he only patted him on the shoulder lightly, but it was difficult to console him. When Yun Shirshir heard this, she felt a sharp pain in her heart. She immediately said, Yu, don't let your imagination run wild. Little sister, why would little sister hate to you? Then why does she cry whenever I hug her? He was even more grieved. I didn't want little sister to hate me. To his tears is to S's twos. He's evens to little to us. Twos. I like little sister so much. I think she likes me as her brother too. Muyaja hugged him gently. Xiao Qin was beside them, but he didn't know how to comfort him. At this moment, the confinement nanny walked over and said with a smile, Yu, could it be that the smell of Chinese medicine on you is too strong? Although little sister is still young, her nose is very sensitive. Of course, she doesn't like the smell of Chinese medicine. When Xiao Qin heard this, he immediately leaned over and sniffed his body. He nodded and said, Yeah, the smell of Chinese medicine is indeed a little strong. He had indeed been drinking Chinese medicine for the past few days. Is that really the case? Yu stopped crying. He raised both his arms and sniffed himself, but he couldn't smell anything. This was because he had been drinking Chinese medicine and his nose was already used to the smell. He couldn't smell anything strange anymore. Chapter 3050. His heart wasn't good. Every time the season changed, his heart would palpitate if he didn't take care of it. Hence, he had been drinking Chinese medicine for the past few days. People who drank Chinese medicine would more or less have the smell of Chinese medicine on them. They might not be able to smell it normally because the smell was very faint if they kept a distance. However, when they were close enough, they could smell it clearly. Because of that, Yu Yao, who was being held in his bosom, was able to smell it the clearest. Because of that, she began to resist. The child was still young and couldn't speak yet. Hence, she could only cry to express her dissatisfaction. The confinement nanny was just saying it to comfort him, telling him not to take this matter to heart. However, the boy, who loved his sister dearly, kept this matter in his heart. When he got home that night, the nanny had boiled the Chinese medicine and placed it on the table. She called out to him, "Yu, time to drink your medicine." After Yin Sure gave birth, Muyaja had arranged for her to go to the best confinement center in the capital for her confinement. During her absence, he had hired a nanny to take care of the two children. Yu walked over and glanced at the Chinese medicine. Suddenly, he remembered how his sister had cried and his heart ached again. It was all this Chinese medicine's fault. He hated this medicine to the core. However, he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he said to the nanny, "Auntie, I'll bring it back to my room to drink." "Okay, be careful. It's hot. You can drink it after it cools down." "Okay." Yu picked up the bowl and walked back to his room. The nanny reminded him from behind, "Be careful. Don't spill it." "Okay, got it." Yu carried the bowl back to his room and closed the door. He lowered his head and sniffed it. Instantly, he frowned. Indeed, Chinese medicine smelled really bad. If he hadn't been used to it and drank it often, he probably wouldn't have been able to stand the smell. Thinking of Yue Yao, he hesitated for a moment. Then he walked to the bedside, opened the window, and poured the medicine out onto the flower bed. He was smart enough to keep a mouthful and not pour it all out. Every time he drank it, there would be some dregs left. If he poured it all out at once, it would arouse suspicion. After sitting in the room for half an hour, he walked out with the bowl of medicine and placed it on the table. He said to the housekeeper, "It's finished." The nanny walked over with the clean clothes, but she didn't think much of it. She nodded and said, "Leave it there. I'll wash it later." "Yes." "Okay, thank you, Annie." This child, there's no need to be so polite. Yu's thoughtfulness warmed her heart. Hence, she did not realize that the child was doing something behind her back. Xiao was still reading in the study. He still remembered what Yu had said a few days ago. Hence, at night, he still worked hard. He took out his problem book and racked his brains to calculate. Yu went into the bathroom. When he showered, he used a lot of body wash and rubbed it all over his body. After washing twice and wiping himself clean, he took a whiff. He was still worried, so he secretly rubbed some body wash on himself to make sure that he smelled good. Then, he changed into his pajamas and walked into the study. Xiao was still calculating when he suddenly saw his problem book covered by a shadow. Chapter 3051. Do I smell good? The corner of little Chin's eyes twitched violently as he sniffed seriously. Yes, it's the scent of shower gel. Does it still smell like Chinese medicine? With Yu's reminder, Xiao was shocked and said, "No, I can't smell it anymore." That was strange. Every time he drank the medicine, the smell of Chinese medicine would be very strong. He asked nervously, "What's wrong? Did you forget to drink the medicine?" "I drank it." "Really?" Every time he drank it, he would smell like Chinese medicine. "Don't lie to me. If you stop taking the medicine, you'll already said that I drank it." Yu continued, "But I used a lot of shower gel and some perfume. My little sister won't despise me if I smell good like this." Xiao smiled and nodded. However, Yu wasn't in a hurry to carry Yue Yao. Instead, he secretly stopped taking medicine for 2 days. He was only relieved when he didn't smell like Chinese medicine after 2 days. However, when he stood in front of the crib and looked down at the little thing lying in the crib with her eyes wide open and her little feet kicking around, he felt a little scared. He raised his arms solemnly and sniffed his sleeve. When he couldn't smell any Chinese medicine, he took a deep breath and smiled. This was because he was afraid that he wouldn't smell like Chinese medicine this time. At this time, the reason why he resisted the smell of Chinese medicine would no longer be valid. What if his little sister cried again? Then she would really hate him. He was afraid that his little sister wouldn't like him. Xiao encouraged him. Yu, what are you waiting for? Didn't you say that you wanted to carry your little sister?" Yu felt uneasy and hesitated for a long time. Then, he carefully carried Yue Yao in his arms. Yu looked at the little girl in his arms. She was sucking on her thumb and looking at him with a pair of curious eyes. Yu's heartbeat suddenly quickened. He was worried that she would cry in the next second. Muyaja looked at him from the side. He saw Yu Yu hugging Yue Yao with a solemn and sincere expression. It was as if the person in his arms was a holy little angel that no one could blaspheme. She stared at him, and he stared back at her. Yu Yu held his breath as she stared at him curiously. The little thing's eyebrows had yet to fully develop, and its face was still chubby. This was the real baby fat. Its eyelids were slightly swollen, but its eyeballs were as black as agate. Yet they exuded a lively aura, as if they were the purest spring water in the world. Just as he was feeling extremely nervous, he saw the little thing in his arms smiling at him. Its round eyes curved into two small crescent moons. Its childish smile was soundless, but it could melt one's heart. She was especially beautiful when she smiled. At that moment, Yu Yu really felt as if he had seen an angel smile. The nervousness on his face immediately dissipated. He looked up at Muyaja agitatedly and exclaimed, "Daddy, little sister is smiling at me." I saw it. Yu Yu was extremely touched. He gently rubbed his face against her face and let out a crisp laugh. "Little sister, I'm your brother. My name is Yu Yu. Hello." Yu Yu looked up, and his gaze landed on Yue Yao's soft face. His handsome eyes were filled with doting laughter. He exhaled softly and said, "Yue Yao, welcome. Welcome to this world." Chapter 3052. This was probably a formal greeting between him and little Yue Yao. Xiao Yichen's heart was also warmed by this scene. He walked over to Yu Yu's side and rested his chin gently on his shoulder. He quietly watched the soft little girl stretch her limbs in Yu Yu's arms. She put her chubby little paws in her mouth and curled them up sometimes. "You even know how to curl your fingers?" Xiao Yichen quickly moved her paws away and said, "You can't bite your hand." Then he used his own hand to wipe away the saliva on her hand. Hua Jin laughed beside them. Yue Yao really knows how to reincarnate. She has two older brothers who dote on her so much. She's amazing. For some reason, little Yue Yao opened her mouth and spat out a small bubble. She smacked her lips and put her fingers in her mouth again. Her eyes darted around nimbly as she looked at the world around her curiously. Muyaja saw this and was amused. What is she looking at? She's probably looking at the two older brothers. Gong Jie walked over and said to Yu Yu, "Let uncle carry her." "No." Yu Yu defended her and pouted. Little sister finally stopped crying. "Let me carry her for a while longer." Gong Jie frowned as well. "I haven't been able to carry her for the past few days. Little Yue Yao wants to see uncle too. Let me have her." Yu Yu turned around and refused to let him have her. Xiao Yichen was amused by this and said, "From now on, little sister won't have to walk anymore. When we go out, I'll have to carry Yu Yu. Yu Yu will have to carry mommy, and uncle and daddy will have to fight with me to carry her. Don't tell me her calves are going to become ornaments." Yin Sure leaned on the bed and said with a smile, "All right, stop messing around with her. Give her to me. It's time to feed her." When Muyaja heard this, he hurriedly stood up and carried the child into her arms. Then he turned around and looked around meaningfully. Everyone received his gaze and tactfully walked out of the door. Only after everyone had left did she lift her clothes to feed her nipple. While the baby was suckling, Muyaja sat by the bed and looked around. Suddenly, he said, "This baby's eyes are like yours." "How can you tell?" "I can tell just by looking at the outline of his eyes." Muyaja gently pinched her cheeks, not daring to use too much force. It was just a symbolic touch, and it felt as smooth as milk. He added, "Someone like you will definitely be a beauty when you grow up. Didn't they say that daughters look a little like their fathers?" He still couldn't tell right now, so he couldn't rush to a conclusion. "I think that if a daughter looks like you, she'll be even prettier." Muyaja looked at her, his heart filled with infinite tenderness. It was a little different from when he held Mu Yichin in his arms when he was born. At that time, he hadn't experienced her pregnancy, and he hadn't been by her side to guard her and accompany her through all those joys and sorrows. He hadn't been in the delivery room to witness the arrival of life with his own eyes. Hence, when Mu Yichin was carried into his arms, he looked at him and exclaimed in his heart, "Oh, this is my son." However, although he was happy, he wasn't deeply moved. As Xiao Yichin grew up, He didn't know how to play the role of a father. He only knew that he couldn't spoil him too much. Otherwise, he would spoil him too much, and that wouldn't be good. Chapter 3053. Therefore, he was strict with his son. That was his education philosophy. Xiao Qin had once been in awe of him. However, when he was with her, the fatherly instinct in him seemed to have finally awakened. He also knew that if he doted on the child properly, the child would not be spoiled. Especially when she was preparing for labor, he deeply understood that it was not easy for a little life to come into being. The process in between was mixed with pain and happiness, as well as the anxiety of waiting. Therefore, when he looked at little Yue Yao, he was no longer the ignorant father from 8 years ago. He was a mature and steady father. If one were to say that Yun Shishir's appearance had changed him, for he had always been arrogant and insufferably arrogant. However, she had gently ground away his sharpness and edges, turning him into a man who knew how to love. In that case, Yu Yao's appearance had instilled boundless tenderness into his heart, allowing him to become an even gentler father. When he looked at her, she looked at him too. He suddenly had a feeling in his heart. For her, everything was worth it. He wanted to give her the best things in the world. This feeling might have something to do with the special relationship between father and daughter. Why else would people say that daughters were their father's lovers in their previous lives? With such a special fate, Mu Yaja's love for Yue Yao was even more indescribable. He loved her deeply and wanted to take good care of her. Some children's hair was not thick when they were born. However, little Yue Yao had thick black hair, long eyelashes, and fair but healthy skin. When Yun Shishir was pregnant, she paid attention to the balance of nutrition. In addition, her and Mu Yaja's genes were not bad. No matter how they gave birth, the child would be good-looking. Therefore, when a nurse carried the child for the injection, the other nurses saw it and were extremely envious. With their rich experience, they could tell at a glance that this child would definitely be a beauty when she grew up. When little Yue Yao was given an injection, she attracted a lot of attention. Even the directors of the obstetrics and gynecology department came out when they heard the news. When the child was brought back, the nurse said with relish, "Didn't you see those doctors fighting to carry her? I didn't even let them. They said that this little princess can't recognize people and would cry if she were to be carried by anyone. They all said how regretful they were. Then they all said that this child would definitely be very good-looking when she grows up." When Muyaja heard this, he raised his eyebrows and said, "Don't you know whose daughter she is?" There was a hint of smugness in his words. He was showing off. The nurse said to Yun Shishir, "Shishir, you're so lucky. You have such a handsome husband, a pair of handsome sons, and a daughter who is as beautiful as a little angel. God's favor, God's favor." Before Yun Shishir could speak, Muyaja said, "You're wrong." "What? What do you mean?" Muyaja gazed at Yun Shishir affectionately and said, "It's my good fortune to be able to marry her." This sentence was like a piece of sweet candy that melted on the tip of her tongue. The nurse was even more envious and couldn't help but say, "You two are so loving." With that, she left. After she left, only the two of them were left in the room. Little Yue Yao was asleep, while Gong Jie and the others brought Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen to Leji Holdings to do some shopping. Chapter 3054. Yu Yu waved his hand and said that he was going to buy clothes, toys, and teething sticks for his sister. Gong Jie wanted to see the little princess more, but in the end, he was dragged away by Yu Yu. Muyaja sneered in his heart. This son of his knew how to read people's faces. He knew that they had not enjoyed their time together for a long time. Recently, Liji had launched a new baby and baby counter. It was said that Yu Yu had suggested it when Yun Shishir was pregnant. Liji had basically been taken over by Li Hanlin. Li Hanlin had been promoted to CEO of Liji, and Yu Yu had retired behind the scenes. He did not want to waste time on other things. After Yun Shishir was pregnant, he decided to spend more time with his sister. To welcome his sister, he had especially urged Li Hanlin to develop the baby and baby market. After 8 months of preparation, Liji had launched the baby and baby counter. However, in recent days, there have been complaints from consumers that the baby and baby products in the counter were more targeted at baby girls. This was what Yu Yu had requested. This was one of his selfish reasons. When he had free time, he would scribble on a piece of paper and design some toys for his sister. The product development required some time, so he had to come up with the idea in advance. When his sister was old enough to play with toys, he wanted to let his sister play with the toys he had designed. Because of the birth of little Yue Yao, he did not take care of the Davai project. He threw the half-drawn blueprint aside and did not care about it anymore. Gong Jie did not care about it either. Even if he was ambitious about the Davai project, it was not as important as his niece. Even if it was the Hurricane Group's affairs, Yu had also kicked it aside. The room was quiet. Little Yue Yao was sleeping soundly. Muyaja lay down on the bed and held her in his arms. She had been sleeping quietly, but was disturbed by his actions. She frowned and felt his hot breath on her cheeks. The next moment, the man lowered his head and kissed her lips. It felt like he hadn't kissed her for a long time. He kissed her, but he didn't dare to take her any deeper. However, when their lips parted, Muyaja lowered his gaze and stared into her eyes. Her beautiful cheeks, which seemed to have been dyed with rouge, and her eyes seemed to be able to hook his soul. He actually could not bear to part with her just like that. Therefore, when she saw him coming up to her again, his large palm forcefully clasping the back of her neck, he almost didn't allow her to retreat even half an inch. The scorching, deep kiss, conquering the city, swept through her mouth invasively. She softly snorted, her voice soft and delicate, and her body actually started to heat up slightly. His body also tensed up, and a familiar reaction occurred in a certain part of his body. He instinctively did not want to be restricted to just one kiss. He wanted to have more of her to a greater extent. Their lips tangled together, and their breathing gradually quickened. He stared at her. She closed her eyes, but even if she couldn't see, the burning in a man's eyes was self-evident. But when he kissed her collarbone, he forced himself to leave her lips. He wanted her and had endured for almost 10 months, but he deeply understood that now that she had given birth, she could not bear him at all. Chapter 3055. Hubby, it's been hard on you. She was pregnant, and it had been hard on her, but it wasn't easy for him either. She had clearly seen how much he had sacrificed for the past 10 months. His forbearance, his tolerance, his care, and his companionship. She could see from every detail that he had sacrificed no less than she had. If their identities could really be swapped, this proud man would also be willing to bear the pain of childbirth for her, especially during that period when she was extremely depressed. It was also him who had taken her step by step away from that swamp. She suddenly said, "Actually, there's something that I'm really troubled about." Muyaja stroked her silky hair and raised his eyebrows. What is it?" She pondered for a moment and hesitated for a long time before deciding to tell him about it. "Don't you think that we've always done a good job with pregnancy prevention?" Muyaja's eyelids twitched fiercely. Very quickly, he knew what she was puzzled about. "But how did you get pregnant?" Yin Shishir was still puzzled. "I remember that I've always been taking long-acting contraceptives. Could it be that the contraceptives are useless?" "Contraceptives aren't anything good. Taking too many of them is bad for your health. Don't take them again in the future." He didn't answer her question, but deliberately changed the topic. Yin Shishir's thoughts weren't led away by him. She was still troubled by this topic. "We've done a good job with contraceptives. Not only do I take pills, but you also wear condoms sometimes. Logically speaking, it's impossible to get pregnant." Muyaja was a little hesitant to tell her the truth. The reason why the contraceptives had failed was because he had unscrupulously replaced her contraceptives with folic acid. There wasn't much difference between the two types of pills after removing the packaging. She wouldn't necessarily study such small pills in detail. However, he was worried that if she found out that it was his private actions that had caused her to get pregnant, she would be unhappy. After all, this was considered going against her wishes. His sneaky actions didn't seem very honorable. Thus, he probed her. "Don't you like your daughter?" "I like her. Of course I like her. I like her a lot." Yin Shishir was annoyed by him. "What are you talking about? How could I not love my own daughter? After all, it was my own flesh and blood. It was just that I hadn't planned to get pregnant back then, so this child came unexpectedly. However, Yue Yao was born, so I felt that I was lucky." It was a blessing to have both a son and a daughter. You've hit the nail on the head. If you say it's a daughter, then you're really pregnant with a daughter. Muyaja suddenly fell silent. Yin Shirshir added, "This could be considered a beautiful accident." Actually, Muyaja said, "I've always wanted a daughter." Yes, but this time, even if you're pregnant with a son, I will still love and love him very much. So, after some deliberation, he said, "I had previously replaced your birth control pills with folic acid, so Yue Yao's arrival was both within my expectations and beyond my expectations. Because I never thought that my wish would be fulfilled. The heavens have blessed me and fulfilled my wish." Yin Shirshir was stunned for half a second, but there wasn't much change in her expression. She only curved her lips. He thought that she was going to sulk, so he asked a little strangely, "Aren't you angry?" "Huh?" Chapter 3056. About the replacement of the birth control pills. Yin Shirshir shook her head. "At first, I thought that the birth control pills had failed. After all, the success rate of birth control pills is limited, so I didn't think much of it. Later, I looked through the medicine box and realized that the pills in it were different from the ones I used to take. I only suspected it, but I didn't expect that you were the one who secretly switched the folic acid pills." Muyaja smiled. "It's good that you're not angry. Why should I be angry? Only my man can think of such a wise decision. Secretly switching the birth control pills with folic acid, this method is very like your style. Amazing, but I don't mean to blame you. It's just that with Yue Yao, I really don't want to have any more children. It's not because of the body, but because I don't want my love to be divided into too many parts." Yin Shirshir snuggled into his arms and said gently, "With you, Yu, Shaoi Chen, and now Yue Yao, I feel that I'm the happiest woman in the world. I don't want anything else. I just want all of you to be safe and happy. That's enough. I don't want you to have any more children either." Muyaja said, "I didn't experience it before, but now that I've accompanied you through childbirth, I feel that giving birth is really too much for a woman. I'm very satisfied with having 3 children." Yin Shirshir nodded. "Then we have to take care of the birth control measures in the future. Otherwise, if another beautiful accident happens, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Then, if I become a high-risk pregnant woman, I'll really suffer. It's not good to take too many birth control pills. If you wear a condom, it won't be 100% successful. How about I go for a vasectomy when I've recovered a little?" Yin Shirshir said with a smile. Muyaja was stunned and frowned. "No, a vasectomy is just a small operation. It will also prevent a lot of unnecessary trouble." Since they were discussing this topic, Yin Shirshir also wanted to talk to him about it. "Hubby, you know me. In this life, I've decided on you. I don't want anyone else but you. Therefore, this reproductive function can be removed from my life. In my life, I will only have these 3 children. There will be no other children. Since there's a chance that something might go wrong with contraception, why don't we avoid it completely? I heard that ligation is not good for women's health. Since we're talking about this topic, I might as well tell you my decision." "What decision?" Muyaja said solemnly. "I plan to have a sterilization operation." "Well, what?" Yin Shirshir was a little surprised. This man actually told her personally that he was going to undergo sterilization surgery. What did this mean? This meant that he would be permanently infertile. In fact, sterilization surgeries were mostly performed by men in Europe and America. This was because sterilization surgeries for men were relatively less risky. They could recover in a very short period of time. Basically, they could return to work right after the surgery without any side effects. A few days after Muyaja gave birth, the doctor asked him if he would consider having Yin Shirshir undergo a vasectomy operation since they already had 3 children. It was the first time he had heard of this term, and he was a little puzzled. Hence, he asked around to find out what a vasectomy operation was. Chapter 3057. The doctor explained that both men and women could undergo ligation surgery. However, male sterilization was less risky, and the chances of complications would be greatly reduced. Moreover, the failure rate was extremely low, so there was basically no need to worry about the consequences. If a woman underwent ligation, she would have to face the risk of an ectopic pregnancy. For example, an ectopic pregnancy, if it lasted for a long time, it would affect her health, causing inflammation and infection. In that case, it would need to be removed and reoperated. However, in such an environment in the country, most men were very resistant to such surgery. This might have something to do with the deep-rooted patriarchal society that remained in the bones of the men in the country. They felt that such surgery was the greatest blasphemy to a man's face. Most men felt that a man bearing the responsibility of contraception meant that his status was degraded. Moreover, fertility was seen as the core of many men's identity. Sterilization was misunderstood as male castration. Many men even thought that if they were to one day achieve meteoric success and divorce their wives, then they would no longer be able to have children of their own. Many people did not want to give up this path of retreat. In addition, many men treated women as their personal belongings. This was because this kind of respect was hard to show. After all, carrying on a family line was the most important task of men in society. However, Muyaja felt that if the slightest risk appeared on her, then he had to put an end to it. He was determined to put an end to it. How could he let his woman take such a risk? Even if it was only 0.1%, he was determined not to do it. Moreover, he had no worries at all because this woman, this great woman, had already fulfilled his greatest wish by giving him a daughter. Thus, there was no need for him to keep his fertility. He had decided that this woman, would be the only woman in his life who could accompany him to the end of his life. He only had one wife, and his child could only be born of him and her. After the sterilization, he would not have to worry about those messy women coming to sow discord in the future. He had such concerns, too. After all, regardless of whether he was married or not, there were still many women who coveted his life. There was no guarantee that another woman like Song Enya would appear and use despicable means. However, after he was sterilized, he would no longer have such concerns. When that time came, if another woman came to him and said that she was pregnant with his child, then this stupid wife of his would have the confidence to give her a tight slap. The doctor had also explained to him that if a man underwent sterilization, a very small incision would be made to remove the vas deferens and cut it into segments. This surgery might sound scary. However, in his opinion, a woman's sterilization surgery was even more inhumane. For a woman to undergo sterilization, she had to cut her abdomen open, and the fallopian tubes on both sides were more than 10 centimeters apart. He rejected it right away. However, in bed, he did not like to wear condoms. He always felt that it was not very comfortable. Moreover, in a certain aspect, he was very sensitive. Therefore, this feeling of discomfort was infinitely magnified. In the past, he did not wear condoms because he hoped to have another daughter. Now that he had a son and a daughter, he could not bear to see her go through childbirth again. He thought that since he did not like to wear condoms, then he would sterilize her. Chapter 3058. However, Yin Shishir couldn't bear it. She felt that his sacrifice was too heavy. However, her worries were nothing in Mu Yaja's eyes. After all, women were the carriers of new life. They had to menstruate every month, and this was already a huge burden. Pregnancy took 10 months. After giving birth, their figures would be out of shape and would take a long time to recover. They also had to consider confinement and breastfeeding. What about men? If they wanted children, they just had to be responsible for sowing the seeds. If they accidentally got pregnant, they just had to fork out the money. The woman would still be the one suffering. In this aspect, women were at too much of a disadvantage. Hence, he made this decision. He hugged her tightly and said, "I don't have to consider that our marriage won't last long, and I don't have to consider having children in the future. The risk of sterilization is small. This is my decision. I'm just informing you. It's not a discussion. As long as you know it, you don't have to say anything." His attitude was very firm. This was just a notification, not a discussion, and he didn't intend to ask for her opinion. When Yin Shishir heard this, she was extremely touched. This man was worried about her having to undergo a vasectomy. What was even more unexpected was that he had already made his decision long ago. However, such words were very much like his style. Perhaps, if she hadn't mentioned this, he would have hidden it from her and secretly done the surgery before mentioning it to her. He wasn't good with words, and always gave silently. In his mind, he would give for someone willingly as long as it was worth it. However, giving was giving, and he wouldn't give for some purpose. He loved her. He only loved her. He loved her without reservation. It was just that pure. Yun was touched by his thoughtfulness and tolerance. She was even more touched by his love. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders, leaned forward, and kissed him on the cheek. "Hubby, thank you." Muyaja's lips curled into a smile. Just as he was about to kiss her on the lips, the door to the ward was suddenly pushed open. He looked up sharply and saw Gong Jie standing at the door. He looked a little embarrassed when he saw this ambiguous scene. Behind him, Huajin was blocked outside the door by his Gong Jie. Seeing that he was in a daze, he pushed him on the shoulder and said, "Why aren't you going in?" Yu and Xiao Qin poked their heads in from both sides of his legs. They were surprised to see Mu Yaja and Yun Shir hugging each other. Xiao Qin said angrily, "Daddy, you're despicable. Did you purposely send us away so that you can enjoy some alone time with Mommy?" "Daddy is the most cunning." Yu said. Mu Yaja glared at Gong Jie. "Why didn't you knock before coming in?" I didn't expect you guys to be so intimate. There's no sign on the door that says no entry." However, in his heart, he was thinking that this Mu Yaja had purposely sent him away so that he could dominate his sister. This was too much. Mu Yaja snorted coldly, but he didn't let go of Yun Shir. Since they had been caught, there was no need to hide it. He was hugging his woman and kissing her. It wasn't something embarrassing. Gong Jie was the first to walk to the crib. After taking the best position, he wanted to hug the baby Yue Yao. Chapter 3059. Sensing that someone was touching her, she gave a forceful kick like a little bunny and kicked Gong Jie's big palm away. You're so strong." Gong Jie found this to be extremely amusing. However, when he saw that her little feet were still bouncing up and down, he had the urge to tease her. He reached out his long fingers and gently tickled the soles of her feet through her socks. Little Yue Yao was very sensitive. As Gong Jie teased her, her little legs kicked even harder. You're like a little rabbit." Yu and Xiao Qin immediately came over to take a look. They saw that little Yue Yao's legs were like the paws of a little rabbit. She was kicking and kicking, and her eyebrows were slightly furrowed. She seemed a little unhappy. Yu was eager to protect his little sister. He immediately said, "Uncle, don't disturb your little sister's sleep. You've slept for so long. Have you slept enough?" The man smiled and grasped the little thing's tiny feet with his large palm. Revealing his pearly white teeth, he looked devilish and unrestrained. Little Yue Yao was woken up by him. Her face was wrinkled, and she looked like she was going to cry again. When a child didn't sleep well, she would cry to vent her dissatisfaction. Gong Jie said, Oh. He calmly coaxed, "Don't make a fuss. Don't make a fuss. Uncle will carry you. Uncle will dote on you." Yu, who was standing at the side, could not help but burst into laughter. He felt that such an arrogant man like his uncle was carrying such a cute little thing in his arms. He was like an ordinary stay-at-home dad, coaxing his daughter with infinite tenderness. It was hard to imagine that this man was the most terrifying chief commander of Hurricane Group, Gong Jie. Wasn't the difference in their image a little too big? Yu couldn't stop laughing. Gong Jie saw that he was laughing and said angrily, "What are you laughing about?" Yu cleared his throat and smiled elegantly. "Nothing. I just feel that, Uncle. Why are you so cute?" Gong Jie awkwardly moved his face away and snorted coldly, looking very arrogant. Mu Yaja turned around and said to her, "I'll prepare for the operation in the next 2 days. Don't worry. Isn't it too rushed?" "No, it's just a small operation. It doesn't require much effort and energy." Mu Yaja said to her again, "You just have to focus on your confinement and recuperate. You still have to prepare for the wedding." "Wedding? Aya, how could I forget about this?" Yin Shir didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I was so focused on my little Yue Yao that I forgot that someone still owes me a grand wedding. You may have forgotten, but I haven't. However, you'll have to wait until your eyes recover. Otherwise, how regretful will you be if you can't see how beautiful you look in your wedding dress?" Yin Shir was a little pessimistic. She said a little uneasily, I heard that cornea donors are not easy to come by, and we might not be able to seize the opportunity. I'm just worried that by the time my eyes recover, Yao will have already grown up. Yu immediately said, Mommy is letting her imagination run wild again. With Daddy and Uncle around, Mommy doesn't have to worry for nothing. Everyone says that Yao is good-looking, but unfortunately, I haven't seen it. Yin Sure suddenly sighed. It's such a pity that my daughter has been born, but I can't take a good look at her. I wonder when I'll be able to see what she looks like. Chapter 3060. Little Yao, do you know? Mommy doesn't want to miss a single moment of your life. Hua Jin was sitting at the side. When he heard this, he couldn't help but look a little stunned. He suddenly stood up and instructed the nanny to take good care of Yun Sure. Then, he walked to Mu Yaja's side and patted his shoulder gently. He pointed to the door, indicating that he had something to say to him. Mu Yaja nodded, got up, and walked out of the door with him. As if afraid that Yun Sure would hear their conversation, Hua Jin walked to the balcony and stopped. Mu Yaja walked over and asked him, What's the matter? He asked Sure's eyes, Do you have a way to find a suitable donor? Mu Yaja saw the anxiety in his eyes and thought that this matter had been troubling him for a long time. He said, You don't have to worry. How can I not be worried? There's been no news for so long, and there's no suitable donor. I'm waiting too. What, there's no news? Hua Jin was even more anxious now. Sure wants to see little Yao, but it's already a luxury. My heart aches when I see her, and I hope that she can have the operation as soon as possible. Mu Yaja frowned, but remained silent for a long time. Seeing that he was silent, Hua Jin thought that he was also worried about this matter. He couldn't help but say softly, If you really can't find one, use mine. As soon as he said this, Mu Yaja was stunned. He was extremely shocked. Yours? Yeah. Hua Jin nodded heavily and immediately explained, Brother-in-law, don't worry. I'm willing to do it. If Sure can see it, I'm willing to give up my cornea. Also, you don't have to worry about me seeing it. I've asked the doctor, and he said that even one cornea is fine. No. Mu Yaja felt that it was ridiculous. He didn't expect this guy to not only talk about it, but also ask the doctor in advance. Hua Jin asked, Why not? Didn't the doctor tell you that a living person's cornea can't be removed? Hua Jin was stunned. He was indeed not clear about this matter. He only asked the doctor if it was possible to operate on a single cornea. The doctor's answer was yes. He thought that if there was really no donor, then he would use his own eye to exchange for Yin Shure's eye. Brother-in-law, it shouldn't be a problem if you rely on your connections, right? I can sign the agreement. If it's voluntary, there won't be any disputes. Are you crazy? Mu Yaja scolded. If she finds out that she used your cornea, what do you want her to think? Of course I can't tell her. Hua Jin said firmly, Brother-in-law, I once promised Sure that if one day she really can't see, I will be her eyes. Mu Yaja interrupted him. No means no. Brother-in-law. Hua Jin was a little angry. If I knew that you wouldn't agree, then I wouldn't have told you. I have a donor. Mu Yaja suddenly interrupted him. Hua Jin was shocked. What? I have a donor. Chapter 3061. Mu Yaja smirked and said coldly, I don't want to use that donor because I think that donor is dirty. So, I'm waiting. I'm waiting for an excellent donor. If it doesn't work, I'll consider using that person's donor. That person? Hua Jin was even more confused. Who? Mu Yaja decided not to hide it from him. He said, Come with me somewhere, okay? Okay. Mu Yaja brought him to Yulong Bay. Hua Jin followed him to the basement. He made a call, and someone immediately opened the shutter door. Two men came out and greeted him with smiles on their faces. Chairman Mu, you're here. How is she? She's still the same, but she's willing to eat a little. She doesn't eat much and relies on the nutrient solution to sustain herself. Hua Jin was baffled. Mu Yaja turned to look at him and said, Come in. The two of them walked in and saw that the warehouse had been converted into a dungeon. Through the iron bars, Hua Jin could see the skinny and dirty woman tied to the bed at a glance. The reason why it was dirty was because Yina had not taken a shower since the day she was locked up. Her clothes were dirty and stained with vomit and dust. Even though there were people who would usually clean her up, her body would resist the foredrip, and sometimes she would vomit. Who is this? Yin Na. Hua Jin suddenly understood. He knew the name Yin Na. He also knew that Gu Xing's death and Yun Shishir's blindness were related to this woman. He suddenly understood why Mu Yaja had imprisoned her here. This was to nourish her pair of eyes. He could not help but sigh. This man was too two-faced. He kept Yin Na and kept her here until Yun Shishir could undergo surgery. Then, he removed her cornea and transplanted it to Yun Shishir. But I think her eyes are dirty. I won't use her cornea unless it's absolutely necessary. Mu Yaja frowned and said, so I'm also waiting for a suitable donor. Therefore, the worst-case scenario was to transplant her cornea to Shishir. Don't let your imagination run wild. I'm her man. I'm going to spend the rest of my life with her. I will be responsible for her. Hua Jin felt relieved and nodded. When Yin Na saw Mu Yaja, she became excited. She immediately sat up and shouted at him, Mu Yaja, how long are you going to imprison me? Tell me, what is your goal? Let's go, it's dirty here. Mu Yaja didn't want to stay any longer. Hua Jin nodded as well. The two of them turned around and decided to leave. Behind him, Yin Na shouted herself hoarse, Mu Yaja, if you're still a man, then kill me if you have the guts. What is your motive for locking me up and trapping me here? Tell me. Mu Yaja acted as if he didn't hear her and left with Hua Jin. When Yin Na saw Mu Yaja and Hua Jin's departing figures, she broke down even more and shouted at him, Mu Yaja, let me go. Let me go. I know I was wrong. I don't want to live like this anymore. Don't go. I beg you. Let me go. However, what answered her was the heavy sound of the shutter door closing. The world isolated her again. Yin Na collapsed on the bed in despair. She wanted to cry, but she couldn't shed any tears. Chapter 3062. Her heart sank to the bottom of the valley once again. For the past few months, she had been trying to figure out Mu Yaja's intentions. She didn't know what this man's intentions were for locking her up here, feeding her, and keeping her alive. What exactly did he want from her after racking his brains? Yin Na sat on the bed and wailed at the top of her lungs. She wanted to grab her hair, which was as dry as straw, but the handcuffs were tightly locked around her wrists. Now, she couldn't do anything other than breathe when she opened her eyes and sleep when she closed them. The long period of captivity was about to torture her to the point of mental breakdown. The two men sent Mu Yaja away. When they returned, they heard Yin Na's tragic cries. They scolded her in disgust. Shut up. What are you screaming for? Yin Na screamed even louder. She said hysterically, why didn't you kill me? Why didn't you kill me? F***CK. She's getting louder and louder. One of the burly men said, go and gag her. The other man nodded and immediately walked over with a dirty rag. When Yin Na saw it, she kept retreating. That rag was used to wipe the table and shoes, but these people wanted to gag her with it. She kept shouting and yelling, full of resistance. The man wanted to stuff the rag into her mouth, but she didn't hesitate at all. She opened her mouth and bit his wrist hard. The man groaned in pain. The muscles all over his body tensed up, and he instinctively slapped her face to the side. Are you a dog? You're biting people. F***CK. He grabbed her hair and shoved the rag in her mouth without giving her a chance to protest. Yin Na stared at them with tears in her eyes, but she could only whimper. They looked at her as if they were sizing up a bug in a smelly ditch. The man turned around and asked, why did Xiao Mu come here today? The other man said, probably to see how she's doing. After all, she's been imprisoned for so long. I'm afraid she's useless. Huh, how can she be useless? I want starved to death. I heard that President Mu's daughter has been born. Once Mrs. Mu is done with her confinement, the surgery will be arranged soon. As soon as he finished speaking, Yin Na, who had her head lowered, suddenly raised it and stared at them in shock. However, the man did not notice her urgent gaze. Instead, he started chatting with her. He had been guarding Yin Na all this time, and it was extremely boring. Thus, when he was bored, he casually chatted with her. Haven't you heard? Chairman Mu gave birth to a little princess. Now that he's here to see me, he's probably going to prepare for the transplant, right? Mrs. Mu's eyes are still waiting for a cornea donor. Oh, I remember now. If it weren't for this woman's eyes, Chairman Mu wouldn't have kept her alive until now. Madame Mu is really pitiful. She's been blinded by this little b asterisk tch. She must get revenge on her. What? Yin Na's eyes widened in anger as she listened, but she was so scared that she didn't even dare to breathe loudly. She held her breath and listened to their idle chatter. However, a man who had just arrived asked curiously, "Say, why didn't you perform the cornea transplant earlier?" Chapter 3063. The man sucked in a breath of cold air. Cornea? Don't tell me he's going to remove the cornea from this woman's eyes while she's still alive? What else? Do you still pity her? This woman is very despicable. She brought this upon herself. Tsk. No, he can't do that. Yana suddenly leaned against the wall in fear. She couldn't believe that Mu Yaja would be so cruel. What do you mean he can't do that? B asterisk tch, this is the debt you owe, and you should pay it back. If you knew this would happen, why did you do it in the first place? Tell me, your sister is Madame Mu. You can live a good life, but you have to commit such a sin. What's the point? Yin Na's breathing suddenly quickened. She opened her mouth, but couldn't say anything. It turned out that Mu Yaja kept her alive and didn't punish her or torture her because of her eyes. She finally understood, but she couldn't. She wasn't afraid of pain, but she couldn't accept it. Why? Why'd he treat her like this? Did the heavens think that she hadn't been tortured enough? She could give her eyes to anyone, but Yin sure. That name made her hate her to the core. After Mu Yaja's visit, Yin Na found out about this matter and could not recover from it for a long time. In the beginning, when she was making a ruckus, she even used all means to anger the men guarding her, hoping that they would beat her to death in a fit of anger. However, after the excitement and nervousness, she suddenly thought it through. She stopped arguing and quieted down. Her heart was like a stagnant pool without any ripples. She had figured out one thing and was secretly planning how to carry it out. That night, the few of them prepared dinner and were about to eat when Yin Na suddenly said, "I want to eat." When a man heard this, he was surprised. This woman had never been willing to eat obediently. Most of the time, she relied on the nutrient solution to survive. Sometimes, they were afraid that it wasn't good to be on the nutrient solution all the time, so they would force-feed her, but she didn't cooperate at all. Now that she took the initiative to ask for food, the man felt that it was extremely deliberate. The man kissed her angrily. "Why are you saying that you want to eat for no reason again? Didn't you refuse to eat in the past? I'm hungry. I want to eat meat. I want to eat rice. Can't I do that?" Yin Na was overbearing, and her gaze was fierce. When the man saw her attitude, he became even angrier. "You stinking woman, I'm talking to you properly. Why are you acting like a mad dog?" Yin Na sneered and said, "I want to eat. If you don't give it to me, then I won't eat." They looked at each other, feeling suspicious and even more vigilant. "You're not going to play any tricks, are you?" Yin Na, on the other hand, was so angry that she laughed. "You've tied my hands and legs, so what can I do? Moreover, look at all of you. You're such big men. Don't tell me you're afraid that you can't handle a woman like me who's about to become a cripple. You're quite sharp-tongued. All right, I got it." The man served her rice, vegetables, and meat, then walked to the bed and said that he wanted to feed her. However, Yin Na said, "I'll eat it myself." "What? Uncuff me, I'll eat it myself." As Yin Na said this, she glared at him fiercely. "I won't eat what you feed me." The man became even angrier and finally lost his patience. "What are you doing? I'll feed you. Don't play any tricks on me." Chapter 3064. "I won't eat what you feed me." The man almost smashed his bowl as he asked angrily, "Are you going to eat or not?" Yin Na was still stubborn. "I want to eat by myself." "Why? Is this woman trying to escape?" Yin Na was aggressive. "Do you think I can escape? I don't have my handcuffs, but my ankles are still cuffed. Where can I escape to?" When the man heard this, he uncuffed her with suspicion, but his face was still a little wary. With a click, the handcuffs were uncuffed. Yin Na's hands were finally free. She looked up and saw the man staring at her covetously, as if afraid that she would do something rash. She could not help but sneer. Why are you still so worried when my legs are cuffed? Even if I have wings, I can't fly out of here. I've just thought it through and want to live a good life. Thought it through? The man snorted. It's fine as long as you've thought it through. With that, he was no longer so vigilant. He sat at the side, but he did not dare to be too far away from her. His gaze was still on her. Yana did not look at him anymore. She picked up the bowl, held the chopsticks, and casually ate a mouthful of rice, wolfing it down. Seeing that she was eating obediently, the man relaxed even more. You should have done this earlier. If you were willing to eat by yourself earlier, you wouldn't have to suffer so much. Yana didn't even raise her head and didn't even look at him as she continued to eat. This rice was fragrant, but it was a little bitter. It turned out that tears had slipped in her mouth unknowingly, and it tasted astringent. Yana wiped away her tears fiercely. When she thought of how happy enchanting was at this moment, she thought of how she was being pampered by so many people. She was as noble as the clouds, but what about her? Everyone wanted to trample on her. She was as lowly as mud. And that Yin Tianyu, he was still very smug now, right? When she was thrown into the sea, her heart was filled with despair, but God gave her a chance. She hung onto a piece of driftwood and drifted on the sea for an entire night. Just when she thought she was about to freeze and sink into the sea, a fishing boat finally passed by and pulled her onto the boat. She was reborn. After that, she used guns and knives to think of ways to erase the traces of her existence. Because she felt that Yin Na was already dead, and she was a ghost that had climbed up from hell, a malicious spirit that was born for revenge. She wanted Yin Shir and Yin Tianyu to pay with their lives. So she spent a long time coming up with a series of plans for revenge. Especially a few months later, when Li Qin's body was salvaged from the shore and she saw the rotten corpse, she was even more convinced. Yin Na suddenly wiped away the oil stains on her mouth. She raised her head and said coldly, "Is Mu Yaja going to use my eyes as a cornea donor for Yin Shir? Isn't that something you should ask?" Yin Na became agitated. "You put in so much effort to raise me for this purpose?" The man snorted, but did not answer. Chapter 3065. No one paid any attention to her, but she kept talking to herself, as if she wanted to vent the foul air in her chest. What about now? She wants to take my eyes away again? On what basis? On what basis? How much more does she want to take from me? Haha, Muyaja wants to transplant my eyes to her, but he thinks I'm dirty. He's using me, but he hates me at the same time. That's the most hateful thing. When Yana thought of this, she finally made up her mind. She lowered her head and laughed sinisterly. However, I won't let him get away with it. What do you mean? Yana lowered her head and suddenly gripped her chopsticks tightly with both hands. She gripped them so hard that it seemed like she was going to break the chopsticks. Her hands were trembling nonstop, and she suddenly laughed miserably. Ha ha ha, Muyaja, I won't let you get away with it. The man was startled by her laughter. He turned his head abruptly and scolded her angrily. What are you laughing at? Be quiet. His voice stopped abruptly. This was because he saw Yun Na gripping the two chopsticks tightly. Her gaze was ferocious and mournful, and her entire body was trembling violently. When she raised her head again, her eyes were bloodshot and filled with monstrous hatred and anger. She raised her hand and stared at the chopsticks. A certain conviction in her eyes became more and more firm. The man shouted, "What are you doing?" Yin Na suddenly shouted hysterically, "I won't let you get away with it." Her mournful voice broke violently. The man seemed to have guessed what she was going to do. He immediately stood up from the chair and rushed toward her. However, in just a few seconds, Yin Na did not hesitate. She used the sharpest end of the chopsticks to aim at her own eyes and ruthlessly stabbed them into them. She really used a lot of force and was extremely ruthless. The man could not stop her in time. In the next second, he saw the two chopsticks stab in her eyes, and blood splattered everywhere. Yina immediately let out a heart-wrenching scream. The heart-wrenching scream almost broke through the roof and pierced through the clouds. Yina suddenly pulled out the chopsticks, covered her eyes, and fell onto the bed. Because of the immense pain, her body kept convulsing. It was so painful. The pain was heart-wrenching. The sharp object pierced in her eye and pierced through her eyeball. She was in so much pain that she screamed in agony. Her body kept rolling around on the bed. Blood dripped from the corner of her eyes onto the dirty bedsheets. She was in so much pain that she was about to faint. As Yin Na screamed, she thought about how she had destroyed her eyes and Yun Shirshir had lost this donor. She was pleased with herself and laughed bitterly. Ha ha! She was crying, laughing, and screaming at the top of her lungs. She looked so crazy that it was frightening. Just looking at this scene was enough to make one tremble in fear. One could imagine how painful it was. At the side, several people were stunned. No one had ever seen such a terrifying scene. After a while, Yin Na actually fainted from the pain. In the hospital, Mu Yaja received a call saying that something had happened to Yin Na. He raised his eyebrows, but did not appear too nervous. Instead, he said coldly, "I'll be right there." He drove to Yulong Bay. Just as he walked into the basement, a musty smell hit him in the face. A few doctors surrounded the bed. They had just finished the operation and the anesthesia had just worn off. Yin Na slowly woke up. Chapter 3066. Mu Yaja asked in a deep voice, "What's going on?" Standing at the side, the few men in charge of guarding Yin Na immediately said uneasily, "This woman said that she wanted to eat by herself. We were already very careful, but we didn't expect this woman to be so ruthless. She used her chopsticks to stab her eyes." The more he spoke, the weaker his voice became. Yin Na gradually regained consciousness. When she heard Mu Yaja's voice, she suddenly laughed coldly. "Mu Yaja, give up. Ha ha ha. You want to use my cornea to restore Yin Shirshir's vision? Dream on. I won't let you have your way." When Mu Yaja heard this, his face remained calm. He said slowly, "What gave you such a misunderstanding that made you think that I want to use your eyes to replace Shirshir's eyes?" When Yin Na heard this, her face was filled with shock. She suddenly reacted and sneered. "You don't mean what you say. I heard what they said. They said that you used me to get my cornea." Mu Yaja said expressionlessly, "Your eyes are so dirty. Are you worthy of being Shirshir's eyes?" Then, Yin Na didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She asked angrily, "Why did you keep me alive?" "My father-in-law said that he wanted to keep you alive. When he comes back, he will punish you properly." At this point, Mu Yaja looked very regretful. "Why do you think I kept you alive? You said that I coveted your cornea. Yin Na, are you worthy?" When Yin Na heard this, her blood rushed to her head. She had never thought that she would deliberately use her last bit of value to destroy Yun Shirshir, even if it would break her hope and make her despair. However, she didn't expect that Mu Yaja had never wanted to use her eyes to restore Yun Shirshir's vision. She still couldn't believe it, because if he didn't think so, then what was the point of destroying her eyes and suffering such unbearable pain for nothing? She broke down and shouted at him, "You're lying." Mu Yaja stared at her coldly, but she couldn't see him. She just kept yelling, "You must be doing this for my eyes. It must be for my eyes. You must be very disappointed that I destroyed my eyes, right? It must be very painful. Ha ha ha." After a short moment of silence, Mu Yaja smiled coldly and said, "Yin Na, you're really pitiful." Then, he turned around and left without looking back. Yin Na still couldn't stop herself from laughing, and she maintained her pitifully weak dignity. However, when he left, her smile became even more miserable. In the end, as he laughed and laughed, he actually started to cry in despair. "Mu Yaja, I hate you. I curse you. You will die a horrible death. Die a horrible death. Yin Shirshir, you will definitely suffer retribution. Even if retribution doesn't fall on you, it will fall on your child. Let your child pay for your death." Ha ha. Yin Na didn't hesitate to curse him with the most vicious curse in the world. However, everyone looked at her as if she was a pitiful child beggar. No one cared about her. After Mu Yaja left, Minyu followed at the side, wanting to say something but hesitating. He turned around to look at Minyu and said, "If you have something to say, just say it." Chapter 3067. "No." "Then Minyu said, "That's not what you said before. I deliberately revealed this information because I knew that if she knew about it, she would definitely destroy her eyes by hook or by crook. Muyaja said coldly. She destroyed her eyes with her own hands and then found out that no one wanted her eyes. That feeling of despair must be very painful. Minyu couldn't help but shudder. However, he felt that this was the boss's style of doing things. I thought you would torture her ruthlessly. A woman like Yuna is already a living dead. Hatred is engraved in her bones. Physical torture can no longer shake her. Even if she is tortured until she is covered in scars, she won't feel anything. How much do you think a woman who didn't hesitate to burn her own fingerprints for revenge can feel about physical pain? Moreover, pure torture can't vent the hatred. Such a person can't be regretted, even if she dies 10,000 times. Minyu shuddered even more when he recalled Yun-Na's miserable appearance. Muyaja suddenly stopped in his tracks and came back to his senses. He sneered meaningfully. Don't you think that destroying a person mentally is the cruelest way? Minyu agreed. A few days later, there was another piece of news. Yuna had gone crazy. She had completely gone crazy. The long period of confinement had already tortured her to the point of collapse. Coupled with the sudden and severe mental trauma, her mental state became crazy. Muyaja sent someone to send her to the mental hospital. However, not long after, there was news of Yun-Na's death. She ran to the rooftop alone and jumped down from the 7-story rooftop. She committed suicide by falling off the building. A few nurses could have stopped her, but Yun-Na was crazy. If they tried to stop her, they were afraid that they would hurt the innocent. Therefore, when they called Muyaja to ask how to deal with it, he said, "If she wants to die, let her be." After Yun-Na fell to her death, she hastily took care of her funeral. Such a life had finally come to an unbearable end. Naturally, Muyaja wouldn't let Yin-Shirshir know about this. However, the news of Muyaja falling off a building was still published by the media. Hua Jin accidentally saw the headlines in the newspaper and hurriedly went to look for Muyaja. Didn't you say that you wanted to keep Yun-Na and use her cornea for Shirshir? You never intended to use her eyes, did you? Yes. Then Hua Jin gasped. What about Shirshir? Muyaja looked into his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Before the wedding, I will find a donor as soon as possible and perform a surgery. Isn't the probability too slim?" Hua Jin added, "The wedding is imminent. What if we can't find a cornea donor before the wedding? You don't have to worry about this. As for her, she doesn't have to worry about this either. I'm her man. I'll take care of it." It was hard for Hua Jin to believe that he would be able to handle this matter well. After returning to the villa, he opened the door and saw Yin-Shirshir sitting on the sofa, hugging Yueyao. Her face was gentle and focused. Chapter 3068. He bit his lip and seemed to have made a serious decision. When he returned to his room, he found a number on his phone. After hesitating for a long time, he dialed it. "Dr. Chung?" "Yes, it's me. Can you arrange for the surgery immediately?" Yes. I made my decision." This doctor was the authoritative expert that Hua Jin had contacted. It was impossible to remove the cornea of a living body, but he was probably touched by Hua Jin's persistence. He vaguely said that he knew of a way to remove the cornea of a living person. However, this was against the law. Therefore, his words were extremely vague and did not reveal anything. Hua Jin talked to him over the phone and roughly agreed on the cost and time of the surgery. Then he hung up the phone. He sat on the bed and pondered for a long time. It was impossible to say that he was not afraid of the surgery. However, if it was Yin-Shirshir, he would be happy to be her eyes. The main thing was that he had been waiting for more than 10 months, and his patience had been exhausted. If he really had to wait for a cornea donor, he didn't know how long it would take. Hence, he thought that he might as well use his own cornea. Hua Jin stood up and walked to the door. When he opened the door, he saw Yin-Shirshir standing at the door. Her eyes were empty and unfocused. When she heard the door open, she frowned and opened her mouth slightly. "Hua Jin?" Her voice was trembling and there was a hint of fear in it. Hua Jin was stunned. He didn't know how long she had been standing at the door and how long she had been listening to his conversation with the doctor through the door. "Sis," he had just said one word when Yin-Shirshir raised her hand and gave him a slap. However, This slap was probably just to wake him up. It wasn't heavy, but her whole body was trembling and her eyes were red. You said that you want to do a cornea removal surgery? Are you planning to transplant your cornea to me? Hua Jin's face darkened. His fringe covered his eyes, and he didn't say anything. Perhaps it was because he felt guilty that he didn't know how to respond to her anger. I won't take your eyes. Yin Shishir's attitude was firm, and she said firmly, even if I can't see for the rest of my life, I won't want your eyes. I don't want to. If you dare to do such a thing behind my back, I will cut all ties with you. Sure. Hua Jin was anxious and frightened. He immediately grabbed her hand and coaxed her nicely. Sister, I know I was wrong. Don't be angry, okay? Yin Shishir shook off his hand. She was still very angry. Hua Jin became even more anxious and hurriedly said, I just want your eyes to recover as soon as possible. Yin Shishir suddenly froze. Hua Jin knew that she was really angry and immediately tried to please her gently. Sure, I was wrong. I'm sorry, okay? Please don't be angry with me. I promise you, I will never mention this matter again. I won't do the surgery behind your back, but I really feel sorry for you. Didn't I say before that if there really comes a day when you can't see anything, I will be your eyes? But I didn't expect that day to really come. Chapter 3069. Do you know how guilty I felt when I found out that you had lost your sight? I felt that I must have said something bad to make it come true. I felt that God must have felt that I was too lucky to have found a sister like you. So God wanted to give me retribution, but it was on you. So I thought that since God wanted me to fulfill my promise. Yin Shishir pursed her lips. Seeing that he had repeatedly promised that he wouldn't secretly perform the surgery, she couldn't bear to be angry. She turned around and couldn't see him, but she still tried to look at him with her eyes wide open. She said angrily, Hua Jin, why are you so silly? Do you know how hopeless it is to not be able to see anything? Hua Jin was stunned and nodded. I know. Then why are you still so silly? Hua Jin smiled. Because you're the person closest to me. If I don't treat you well, who else can I treat well? Yin Shishir had mixed feelings when she heard that. She had thought that he was just saying that, but she didn't expect that he would really do it. She fumbled for his hand and held it. She said slowly, Hua Jin, Shao Jie said that he would do his best to help me find a suitable donor. I believe him, and you believe him too, okay? Don't do anything silly again. You must promise me, or I will really ignore you. Hua Jin smiled and nodded with tears in his eyes. Naturally, the matter of the surgery was left unsettled. The cornea issue wasn't without progress. Hurricane Group had a wide network, and even Mu Group couldn't compare to them in this aspect. Muyaja had also been looking for corneas. He and Gong Jie split up. Actually, it wasn't that they couldn't find any corneas, but they weren't good donors. Muyaja was very picky, and he didn't want just any cornea donor. Most of the corneas were from prisoners on death row. He believed in karma, so he definitely couldn't accept corneas from prisoners on death row. During this period, Gong Jie didn't return to the Gong family. Hence, this matter attracted the attention of a certain man. At the main residence of the Gong family, Gong Xiaoying summoned Gong Jie's most capable subordinate, Zhu Ke, and asked about Gong Jie's whereabouts. Previously, when Gong Jie left the Gong family, he did not bring Vermilion Bird with him. However, Vermilion Bird still knew his whereabouts like the back of her hand. After all, Gong Jie had repeatedly instructed her not to mention his whereabouts if his father asked about it. Hence, when Gong Xiaoying asked, Zhu Ke, 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 Zhu Quebec, Gong Xiaoying knew that Vermilion Bird was a tight-lipped person. It would be difficult to pry open his mouth and ask about Gong Jie's whereabouts. In the past, no matter where Gong Jie went, he would report to him immediately. But recently, he was acting mysteriously and deliberately hiding it from him. Gong Jie deliberately kept it from him. Gong Xiaoying felt that something was amiss. Hence, he pondered, could it be that this young man is having an awakening of love and has a mistress outside? He's so addicted to her that he can't bear to come back, right? With that thought, Gong Xiaoying got a little excited. Chapter 3070. How should he put it? As a father, he had been waiting day and night for his son to bring back a woman for him. Then, when the time came, he would have a grandson in his arms. Then he would be elated. This kid deliberately hid it from him, but he had his own methods. One had to know that even though the Gong family's power was divided, the majority of the power was still in his hands. Therefore, Gong Jie acted without his knowledge. Gong Xiaoying naturally sent a few subordinates to investigate his whereabouts. That night, news came that Gong Jie was in the country. In the country? Gong Xiaoying became more and more confused. This kid had been running to that place for a long time. What was going on? He became more and more confused, so he sent someone to investigate carefully. It didn't matter if he didn't investigate, but his subordinates brought back a few videos. These were all from Gong Jie's trusted subordinates. Gong Jie had been wholeheartedly taking care of Yun Shih and his cute little niece these days, so he didn't know of their existence. In the video, he saw a woman carrying a child at the entrance of the hospital. She was smiling like a flower as she got into a nanny van under the crowd support. She was surrounded by a few men, as well as two adorable snow-white boys. Gong Xiaoying recognized the man who was protecting her at a glance. He was Gong Jie himself. The other man was no stranger to him. He was the chairman of the Xingyu Financial Group who had caused a sensation some time ago, Mu Yaja, who had left the Mu Group. He looked extremely careful and protective of this woman. His arm was empty beside her, holding her arm. It seemed that this woman and the baby in her arms were very important to him. However, there seemed to be something wrong with this woman's eyes. Her gaze was fixed in one direction from beginning to end, unfocused. The smile on her face was indescribable happiness. However, what surprised him the most was not why Gong Jie was with a strange woman with a child in her arms. Instead, it was because this woman's face was very similar to Gong Jie's. He recognized a shadow of Mu Qingsheng in her. Mu Qingsheng. The weight of this name that he had been yearning for was too heavy. This woman was an irreparable scar in his life. She used to be beautiful, but now she had become an unforgettable pain. Even if he wanted to forget, that name had already left an eternal mark on his heart. Who was this woman? Gong Xiaoying narrowed his eyes and looked carefully. The woman's eyebrows were like a painting, and her smile was elegant. She had a beautiful and refined face, and she was completely barefaced. Even the high-definition video, her natural beauty was not affected. She seemed to have just given birth, but her complexion was still very good. Her fair face was suffused with a healthy red color. As for her figure, it was not too out of shape. Although her belly was still a little bloated from being pregnant for 10 months, it was obvious that she had recovered quickly and was doing well. After watching a few videos, Gong Xiaoying could not calm down for a long time. He clenched his fists, unable to sort out his thoughts. He questioned his subordinate. "Who is this woman?" His subordinate lowered his head and replied respectfully. "This woman's name is Yun Shih. She is Mu Yaja's wife and has 2 sons and a daughter with him. Now that her daughter has just been born, she was discharged after giving birth. That's all the information we have so far." Chapter 3071. Gong Xiaoying furrowed his brows. It was as if a white light flashed across his eyes. He suddenly suspected the woman's background. Hence, he said sternly, "Investigate this woman's identity." "Yes, sir." 2 months later, Mu Yaja held a 100-day banquet for little Yueyao. At first, there was some controversy over the full moon banquet and the 100-day banquet. Hua Jin said that a month after a baby's birth was considered to have passed a difficult time. Parents would hold a full moon banquet to celebrate the child's passing and hope that the child would grow up healthily. However, Mu Yaja did not agree. The main reason was that a 1-month-old child was still too young. He had done some work in advance. Newborns should not come into contact with people. Everyone's nasal cavity would carry viruses and bacteria. Even healthy people would have bacteria. If they held a full moon banquet while holding a 1-month-old Yueyao, Mu Yaja's heart would naturally ache. Some bacteria were especially harmful to children. If it was the 100-day banquet, the child would be 3 months old after all. However, even if it was the 100-day banquet, Mu Yaja repeatedly emphasized that people should not hold a child casually during the banquet. Everyone knew that ever since Muyaja became a stay-at-home dad and had a princess, he had completely evolved from a slave to a slave to a slave to his daughter. There were not many people invited to the banquet. Those who came were on good terms with him. After all, the 100-day banquet of Muyaja's #1 sweetheart was not something that just anyone could attend. He had protected little Yue very well. Before the 100-day banquet, very few people could see little Yue's real face. As a father, he had hidden her well. Didn't he have to hide her well? This was to prevent some people from plotting against his daughter. When the time came, they would see the little princess and could not forget her. They would pull Yun Shirshir's hand and want to marry into their family. As a madam, he was not good at rejecting them. If so many in-laws suddenly appeared out of nowhere, what would he do? However, he would not be able to escape from the 100-day banquet. Even though Muyaja was reluctant, since he couldn't escape the fact that his daughter was coveted by others, he had to think of a way to filter the guests. Those who were just friends with him, he didn't care. Those who had business dealings but weren't close, he rejected them all. In the end, there were a total of 6 tables of people who attended the 100-day banquet. All of them were close to Muyaja and Yun Shirshir. It wasn't a grand occasion, but the layout was especially warm. The venue was decorated with the theme of Sailor Moon. This was Yun Shirshir's idea. After all, Sailor Moon was the first cartoon she had watched that made her infatuated with young girls. Therefore, it had left a deep impression on her. Any young girl would yearn to become Sailor Moon, and then meet their very own nightgown and mask. With such selfish motives, she mentioned this idea to Muyaja. As her man, no matter how big or small, he would naturally make the decision. Huajin was also very meticulous. He specially hired a bakery to make a Sailor Moon-themed table. The table was filled with exquisite and beautiful pastries. Many of the guests had brought children with them. When they saw such a beautiful table that looked delicious, they immediately snatched it up. The 100-day banquet was probably Yue's official appearance. It was inconvenient for Yun Shirshir to carry her, so she sat at the head of the table. She smiled and welcomed everyone who gave her their sincere blessings. Chapter 3072. When they saw the rumored little princess, some of the women brought by the guests were extremely envious. It had only been a little over 3 months. His face had not yet fully developed, but his lips were already rosy and his teeth were pearly white. At first, he was still sleeping quietly. However, when Gong Jie took him over to carry him, the little guy woke up with a start. He opened his eyes and looked at the world around him curiously. However, with so many guests surrounding her, she did not seem to have stage fright. She did not cry or make a fuss. She was born not to cry. Many people praised that this girl was not squeamish since she was young. A girl who was not squeamish was good. At the banquet, the most excited person was none other than Yu. He stood beside Gong Jie. Those who came to see Yue said that this little girl would be very beautiful when she grew up. He was very proud when he heard that and said proudly, "My little sister will naturally be beautiful when she grows up. She'll be devastatingly beautiful." Her mischievous appearance made many mothers click their tongues in amazement. Xiao Shui also liked little Yue. Although she had not been a mother yet, it was in the nature of a woman to be a mother. Moreover, such a cute little girl, she could not help but want to hug her. She wanted to hold her in her arms and dote on her. However, little Yue recognized people very well. When she reached out to hug her, the little girl ignored her and went straight into Gong Jie's arms. When Gong Jie saw this, he was overjoyed. What did this mean? This meant that his little niece was clinging to him and had acknowledged him. At the side, even Muyaja was jealous. He did not feel good. Gong Jie even winked at him provocatively. Many of those who attended the banquet were important guests of Muyaja's business. Some were in the government, and some were business dignitaries. When they saw Yue, they said meaningfully that they wanted to arrange a marriage. Most of the time, the engagement would be decided during the 100-day banquet. Some of the dignitaries also wanted a rope in the Xingyu financial group. However, a certain arrogant man naturally did not want to use his daughter as a bargaining chip. What did Muyaja hate the most? What he hated the most was marriage. His daughter's future husband was not up to him to decide. It had to be someone that Yu Yao liked for it to count. Even if he was a poor boy, as long as his daughter liked him and he approved of him, he didn't care about his family background. After all, he had such confidence. Of course, Muyaja wouldn't allow those people to curry favor with his in-laws. However, he couldn't make things too awkward at that time. His words were very technical. He was half joking as he rebuffed them one by one. It didn't hurt his face, and he rejected them appropriately. The 100-day celebration was lively. When it ended, the whole family was coaxing Yue Yao on the way home. However, they did not notice the strange look on Yu Yu's face. He deliberately curled himself up in the corner of the back seat. His limbs were a little cold, his face was slightly pale, and his heart was beating extremely fast. He carefully covered his chest, where his heart felt like it was about to jump out. He vaguely realized that he had stopped taking medicine for so many days. It was probably because of the lack of medicine that his heart palpitated a little. Along the way, it was peaceful. However, when they reached home, Yu Yu entered the house. The light shone on his face, and his pale face was immediately seen clearly. Muyaja was the first to notice that something was wrong with him. He saw that he was clenching his fists tightly, as if he was enduring great pain. Chapter 3073. Yu Yu, what's wrong with you? Xiao Yiqin saw Yu Yu's expression and exclaimed, Yu Yu, why is your face so pale? Muyaja continued to interrogate him. Did you stop taking your medicine behind our backs? Yu Yu obviously knew how ruthless his father was. Seeing that he couldn't hide it any longer, he lowered his eyes guiltily and stammered, I only stopped taking it for a few days. How dare you stop taking your medicine? Muyaja questioned. Don't you know that if you stop taking your medicine, if you get heart palpitations? Halfway through his sentence, he couldn't bring himself to reprimand him. After all, after Yue Yao was born, he admitted that he had given all his care and love to Yue Yao and neglected his son, who had always been quiet. He had also guessed Yu Yu's motive for stopping taking his medicine. The little munchkin clutched his chest, unable to hide the pain on his face. His eyes were slightly red, and he stammered pitifully, I want to hug Sister more. But Sister doesn't like the smell of Chinese medicine, right? Yun Shirshi's heart ached when she heard this. She groped her way over and hugged Yu Yu. Choking, she said, Silly Yu Yu, why are you so silly? You know that your body can't stop taking medicine for no reason, especially when the seasons are changing. You like Sister, and you have a long time to accompany her as she grows up. Yu Yu said hoarsely, Mommy, Daddy, I know I'm wrong. In the future, I won't do stupid things behind your backs. Seeing that his attitude was sincere, Muyaja couldn't bear to reprimand him. Yun Shirshir, especially, felt sorry for him and couldn't bear to reprimand him either. After that, Yu Yu resumed taking his medicine. Although he couldn't get close to Sister for a period of time, he was satisfied just looking at her from afar. A month after the 100-day banquet, Gong Jie sent someone to inform them that they had found a suitable cornea donor. This news made Muyaja and Yun Shirshir very excited and gratified. They confirmed it again and again before they believed it. Yun Shirshir was still a little worried about the risks of cornea transplantation. Some people said that after the transplant, the patient might not be able to see again. There were also a few cases where the operation had failed. This made her more or less worried. Therefore, Muyaja specially brought her to the West Mountain Temple to ask for a protective talisman. On the day of the operation, the whole process went very smoothly. After staying in the hospital for many days, Yun Shirshir ushered in the day to remove the bandages. The next day, in the ward, the doctor closed the curtains to ensure that the light in the ward was not so dazzling. He returned to the bed and sat in front of Yun Shirshir. Muyaja and the two little kids stood anxiously by the bed, looking anxious and uneasy. They were afraid that the answer in the end would make them happy for nothing. Gong Jie, on the other hand, seemed very confident. The chief surgeon, this time, was from a medical base of the Hurricane Group. He could even save a dying person. For him, this kind of operation was not even worth mentioning. Relax, don't be so nervous. Yun Shirshir smiled and nodded. She also felt a little uneasy, but she pretended to be calm and squeezed out a smile. Wait for me to remove the gauze, then slowly try to open your eyes. The doctor lowered his voice and guided her patiently. Then, he reached out and carefully removed the gauze on Yun Shirshir's eyes, layer by layer. Chapter 3074. Don't rush, take it slow. Next, try opening your eyes. The doctor encouraged her gently and patiently. Yun Shirshir nodded and took a deep breath. She slowly opened her eyelids a little. The medicine in her eyes was still in her eye sockets, and she felt a stinging sensation accompanied by a burning sensation. She tried her best to open her eyes as far as she could. Her eyes, which had not been exposed for a long time, were stimulated by the air, and they began to tear up. Vaguely, a blood-red glow suddenly appeared in her eyes, and the world in front of her suddenly turned into a red fog. In the blink of an eye, the light quickly dissipated and was replaced by a hazy scene. Yun Shirshir was a little confused about what the red fog was, but it hurt a lot. Ouch, it hurts a little. She couldn't help but mutter softly and subconsciously wanted to rub her eyes. When the doctor saw this, he quickly stopped her and sternly warned her, "Your eyes are still recovering. Don't rub them with your hands to prevent a bacterial infection." Muyaja panicked and asked the doctor, "Doctor," her eyes hurt. Is it serious?" "It's normal. Don't worry, it's normal." After comforting Muyaja, he turned around and said gently, Shirshir, come. Take it slow. Take it slow." Yun Shirshir nodded and opened her eyes again. The world in front of her overlapped. The snow-white curtains, the snow-white bedsheets, everything was so real. Her vision focused again, and it was the doctor's unfamiliar face. Her heart was filled with indescribable joy and gratitude. Seeing the happy smile on her face, the doctor knew that her eyesight had recovered very well, and he gave Gong Jie an affirmative smile. Gong Jie also heaved a sigh of relief and happily hugged Muyaja's shoulders. His face was wild with joy. Little Li Qin, on the other hand, was so touched that his eyes were already brimming with tears of excitement. "Mommy, can you see?" Yun Shirshir smiled and nodded. The doctor quickly gestured for them to be quiet. He turned around and reached out his hand to Yun Shirshir and asked softly, "Tell me, what do you see?" Even though she had regained her vision was still a little blurry. She blinked her eyes hard and tried to open them again until the powerful hand gradually became clearer and clearer. "It's my hand," she answered with a smile. Yi nodded happily. The doctor asked again, "How many fingers do I have? Can you see them clearly?" Yun sure, but in that moment, the blood-red lights in her eyes again. She frowned and focused again, and her vision suddenly became clear. Unbelievable! She could really see. She was so surprised that she couldn't speak. Seeing that she didn't respond for a long time, the doctor couldn't help but worriedly repeat himself. He shook his hand. "How many fingers are there? Can you see clearly?" Under everyone's worried gaze, she quickly reacted and looked at the doctor's hand again. Then, she said hesitantly, 5 fingers." Seeing that she could see clearly, the doctor nodded in satisfaction. Muyaja's heart, which had been hanging high, finally settled down. "Then, try to hold my hand," the doctor said calmly and gently. Chapter 3075. The doctor mistakenly thought that her eyesight had not fully recovered, so he quickly blocked her hand that was rubbing her eyes and warned her in a low voice, "Don't touch your eyes with your hands." Yun Shirshir still hadn't recovered from her shock. "Why do my eyes hurt?" Seeing the confusion in her eyes, the doctor sighed and patted her shoulder gently to comfort her. "You just finished the operation. It's okay if you can't see clearly. Your eyesight will gradually recover in the future." Yun Shirshir couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. The operation didn't fail, right? It didn't. The fact that you can see proves that the operation was very successful. The doctor saw that she was a little disappointed and showed a somewhat dispirited expression, so he patted her shoulder to comfort her. He stood up and reminded her of some taboos before turning to walk out of the room. Hua Jin rushed out of the room after the doctor and asked anxiously, "Doctor, will her eyesight recover in the future?" The doctor stopped and turned to explain patiently, "Don't worry. Some people will have a period of recovery after the operation. Since she can see my fingers clearly, it means that her eyesight has recovered well. Don't worry too much." With the doctor's confirmation, Hua Jin was relieved and let out a long sigh of relief. In the ward, after the doctor left, Yin Shishir still hadn't recovered from her doubts and was in a daze. In just a moment, her vision gradually turned from blurry to clear and focused. She lowered her head as if she wanted to verify something again. She tried hard to focus on her hand, but it became blurry again. She tried hard to open her eyes wide, but after staring for a long time, her eyes began to ache. Do your eyes still hurt? Can you see clearly now? Muyaja sat by the bed and stretched out his hand with a worried expression. Can you see clearly? Yin Shishir reacted and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She smiled helplessly, but there was some bitterness in her heart. She smiled and replied, Of course I can see clearly. It's just that the distance changed too quickly and I couldn't focus in time. The doctor said that her vision will gradually recover. Brother-in-law, you don't have to worry. Huajin comforted. Yin Shishir looked at Muyaja, and the smile on her face gradually faded. She stared at Muyaja's familiar face, and her heart was filled with emotions. To be able to see him again, she was filled with emotions. She knew better than anyone how much he had sacrificed over the years. Nothing could train the body and mind more than suffering. Even though it had only been a few months, Yin Shishir had matured a lot. She had a deeper understanding that happiness was not easy to come by. Tears welled up in her eyes as she suddenly stood up and hugged Muyaja tightly. She said word by word, It's so good to see you again. Muyaja's shoulders were tightly hugged by her, but his heart was filled with happiness. While he was gratified, the tiredness that he had suffered for the past few days that he had not closed his eyes due to nervousness had turned into a trace of sweetness. He couldn't help but feel a little emotional as he gently stroked her back. Do you want to take a look at Wei Yao? He asked. Yin Shishir immediately nodded. Gong Jie turned around and walked to the crib before Muyaja and picked up the little princess. Little Wei Yao was sleeping soundly. She didn't feel anything when he picked her up. She was still nestled in his arms, sleeping soundly. Chapter 3076. Just as he walked over, Yin Shishir sat on the bed, feeling a little nervous. For some reason, when Wei Yao was born, Yin Shishir felt regretful that she could not be the first to see her. However, in her heart, she still tried to picture her facial features. In her heart, Wei Yao would definitely have a pair of especially expressive eyes. They were dark and bright, with a layer of mist in them. When Muyaja said that her eyes were like hers, she did not believe him. After all, it was said that daughters should look like their fathers. However, since he said that her eyes were like hers, then they should be very beautiful eyes. Yin Shishir was still very confident in her genes. She also had a rough idea of her daughter's appearance. However, when Gong Jie really carried Wei Yao into her arms and really saw little Wei Yao's sleeping face, she still could not help but feel agitated. Oh God, this was her daughter. She had picturesque eyebrows, a small nose, and a small mouth. Her facial features were very young and tender, but they were also beginning to take shape. However, looking at it this way, it was a little different from what she had imagined. However, there was one thing that was within her expectations. It was that this daughter's eyelashes were like her father's. They were long and thick, and there was even a little natural curl. Just by looking at Yu and Xiaoi Chen, she knew that Muyaja's long eyelashes genes were especially strong. Wei Yao, Mommy can finally see you. Yin Shishir smiled with relief. As she smiled, the corners of her eyes inevitably became a little wet. This child did not come easy. Everyone worked very hard, including this little guy. When she was at her lowest point, he still stubbornly grew up strong and strong. Her heart throbbed a little, but she was very touched. She was touched by the strength of this little life. She was also touched that she had been taken care of and doted on by so many people all this time. For some reason, little Wei Yao, who was in her arms, actually opened her eyes in a daze. The surrounding people surrounded Yin Shishir, laughing and discussing, which immediately startled her. It was fine if she was not startled, but once she was startled, the little guy did not get enough sleep. She felt wronged. Her eyelids turned pink, and little sparkling teardrops appeared in her eyes. However, the teardrops did not roll out. Instead, they moistened her eyelashes. She cried like a pear blossom in the rain, and it was pitiful. She did not cry loudly. Her little face was scrunched up, and her mouth was open, only of her gums. There was no shadow of her teeth. One could only see her red gums and her tongue slightly curled because of her crying. She's crying. Yin Shishir was surprised. She did not expect little Yue Yao to cry in her arms. However, from the looks of it, this little guy seemed to be a little shy and did not like to be carried by her. At 2 months, little Yue Yao started to recognize people. However, at this time, Yin Shishir did not carry her much. This was because at that time, she had to prepare for the operation. She actually had to take injections. Sometimes, according to the doctor's advice, she would drink important medicine to nurse her health. Naturally, she avoided the little guy because she smelled of medicine. At this time, Yi was also bitterly accompanying her to drink Chinese medicine. The poor mother and daughter could only watch as Mu Yaja carried the little princess enthusiastically. Besides Mu Yaja, Gong Jie and Hua Jin also carried her more. After Yin Shishir gave birth, Gong Jie stayed here. He had originally planned to accompany Yin Shishir to finish her confinement and then return to Hurricane. But in the end, Chapter 3077. In the end, he said that he was accompanying Yin Shishir during her confinement period, but his soul was completely captivated by little Yue Yao. He didn't know where he got his patience from, but from day to night, Yue Yao kept calling Yue Yao. Hurricane called him a few times to urge him to return to the base, but he ignored them all. He hugged Yue Yao all day long, refusing to let go even when the little guy fell asleep. He even said to Mu Yaja, Look, Yue Yao looks like me too. Her eyes will definitely look like mine when she grows up. Yeah. Mu Yaja felt really awkward when he heard this, but Gong Jie was right. Yue Yao's eyes were like his. Mu Yaja didn't know that Gong Jie liked children so much that when Gong Jie tried to snatch Yue Yao away from him, Gong Jie was quick to dodge. A certain man was instantly unhappy and said, My daughter isn't a toy. Why are you hugging her every day? Because I love Yue Yao. Gong Jie said, If you like her, why don't you just give birth to a daughter yourself? Mu Yaja snorted coldly. Yu added, That's right. The woman who wants to give birth to Uncle's child will definitely be sent from here to Paris, France. Gong Jie snorted and said, No matter who gives birth to her, she can't compare to my Yue Yao. These words made Yu and Mu Yaja, this arrogant father and son pair, feel comfortable in their hearts and their ears. This rascal was really good at talking. Gong Jie's words weren't coaxing. Initially, he wanted to spend more time with Shishir when he came back, but he realized that this little niece of his was lovable no matter how he looked at her. He couldn't help but want to hug her and not let go no matter what. After 2 months, the child started to recognize people. Gong Jie hugged her tightly, and little Yue Yao recognized him. When she cried, Gong Jie hugged her and coaxed her. As they laughed, she started to giggle. Her voice was very clear and melodious, like wind chimes. Speaking of little Yue Yao, she was very picky. Other than Mu Yaja and Gong Jie, she wouldn't be willing to be hugged by anyone else. Hua Jin didn't hug her much because Mu Yaja and Gong Jie were there to block him. He didn't have any human rights. He was hoping that he would have a chance when Gong Jie and Mu Yaja got tired of hugging her. In the end, these two energetic men didn't seem to get tired, even if they hug her with one arm, for a whole day. Later on, when Hua Jin finally had the chance to hug her, little Yue Yao couldn't get used to it and started to cry. At this time, Gong Jie had an excuse to take the little one over and gently coax her. The clouds on her face disappeared and the sun could be seen. When she smiled, her eyes were red from crying. When she smiled, it was as if there were countless little stars hidden in her eyes. Even a cold-hearted person's heart would melt because of this smile. She especially loved to eat her fingers. No one knew what kind of delicious thing was on her fingers. When she smiled, she liked to put her little finger in her mouth. She would laugh until she drooled. Gong Jie said that she must have been stunned by his beauty and was drooling. Yu would scold him for being shameless, but Gong Jie would ignore him. He felt that Yu scolded him for being shameless out of pure jealousy. But this family of people, in terms of looks, were all top-notch. In terms of genes, the children of a family would definitely be dragons and phoenixes among men. This saying really came true. Chapter 3078. Yue Yao, on the other hand, was crying hard. She waved her two chubby little paws and looked innocently in Gong Jie's direction, as though she wanted him to carry her back. Gong Jie couldn't bear to see this, but he also hoped that his sister would give Yue Yao a good hug. However, Yue Yao was crying so hard that his heart ached and his liver trembled. Hence, he smiled and said, "Sister, let me carry her." Yin Shishir nodded. She didn't insist and handed Yue Yao to her. After all, she still had a long way to go before she could spend more time with her daughter. There was no hurry. After a long time, she finally saw their faces clearly. Gong Jie was still the same. Yu Yu, Xiao Qin, and Hua Jin were still there. She could finally see them again, but it felt like a lifetime had passed. Yu Yu suddenly threw himself into Yun Shishir's arms and hugged her tightly. "Mommy, can you see Yu Yu clearly now?" Yun Shishir hugged him and nodded. Yes, I can see clearly now. I can see clearly now." Xiao Qin also ran in front of her as though he was a clown. He blinked and made a pitiful face. "Mommy, what about me? Can you see me clearly too?" Yin Shishir pouted playfully. "Yes, you've gained weight. You look like a little meatball." Looking up, she suddenly caught a glimpse of Hua Jin from the corner of her eye. He walked over slowly with a gratified expression and a faint smile on his face. She flipped over, got off the bed, and gently hugged him. "Hua Jin, thank you." Mommy hugged Uncle Hua Jin. "Shouldn't you give Daddy a big hug too?" When Muyaja heard this, he turned his face away awkwardly. His face was strangely a little red. This was a little tsundere. He wasn't used to being too affectionate with her in front of so many people. He felt that he would be laughed at. When Yin Shishir saw this, she sneaked over and tugged at the corner of his shirt. She even cleared her throat solemnly. "Ahem. Sir, can you turn around?" Muyaja raised his eyebrows. Not knowing what she was doing, he turned around with a puzzled expression. Yin Shishir suddenly threw herself into his arms and hugged his waist tightly. She hugged him. She was so strong and strong, unwilling to let go for a long time. Muyaja's lips curved into a smile. Yin Shishir raised her head to look at him, but she just could not get enough of his face. The first person she saw after regaining her vision was him. That was the happiest thing. She held his face in her hands and looked at him carefully. Her gaze kept focusing until she finally saw his face more clearly. She could still see those handsome eyes, high nose bridge, and thin lips. However, after experiencing Yue Yao, those eyes and brows had settled down and the sharpness of the past had been polished and smoothed out. Yin Shishir's lips curved. She inched closer and stood on her tiptoes. Before she could take the initiative to give him a kiss, the man smiled dotingly and took the opportunity to wrap his arms around her waist. Then, he bent down and kissed her. This kiss was like a long-awaited reunion. It was a kind of lingering longing. It was too strange. They were clearly together every day. However, she felt that the time between seeing him again was really too long. This kiss was both familiar and unfamiliar. Yin Shishir was grateful to be able to see the world clearly again. At this moment, a kind of sigh arose spontaneously from the bottom of her heart. To be able to have him involved in her life was the greatest blessing of her life. Chapter 3079. The sun was setting in the west. A week after she was discharged from the hospital, Yin Shishir sat under the setting sun with little Yue Yao in her arms. She looked at the evening sky lazily. Yu Yu and Xiao Qin were beside their little sister. Yu Yu was in charge of telling her fairy tales, while Xiao Qin was making funny faces as he played with the swaddled tiny tot. She snickered in her heart. She wondered if little Yue Yao could understand Yu Yu's stories. She opened her eyes wide and looked curiously at Yu Yu. Her mouth opened and closed, and from time to time, she would let out a crisp giggle that sounded like a silver bell. "Mommy, little sister is laughing. Will she be able to understand my stories?" Yu Yu was a little excited. However, Xiao Qin said, "Little sister is still so young. Of course, she won't understand. She must think that you look funny. That's why she smiled." Yu Yu was so angry that he raised his fist and wanted to punch him. What do you mean fun? Mui-chin, give me a clear explanation. Mui-chin made a funny face at him, turned around, and ran away. Yu threw his book aside and chased after him. In the huge backyard, the two of them played together. Yin Shishir was so happy that her heart was about to overflow just by looking at the two little clowns. Suddenly, they heard the sound of a car engine from outside the door. Xiao-Chin said excitedly, "Daddy must be back." As he said that, the two little guys ran out of the door to welcome him. Yin Shishir recalled that in the morning, Muyaja had whispered in her ear, "Today, I'll go and finalize the details of the wedding." At that time, she had been in a daze and had mumbled a few words before falling asleep again. Now that she thought about it, he must have finalized the details of the wedding with the wedding planner. Yin Shishir walked over with Yue Yao in her arms, only to see Muyaja, Gong Jia, Hua Jin, and a few other unfamiliar men standing next to the car. They were talking about something with relaxed expressions. Gong Jia's eyes were sharp. He saw Yin Shishir and waved his hand. "Sister." Muyaja looked over, only to see Yin Shishir carrying Yue Yao under the setting sun, slowly walking towards him. The weather had turned cold, and she was wearing a knitted jacket. Her face was tranquil, and her beautiful hair was draped over her shoulders. From time to time, it would brush against her shoulders, and the gentle breeze would lift the corner of her skirt. She was quiet but charming. Yin Shishir smiled faintly. "Hubby." The man walked towards him. Such a handsome man, no matter which frame the time stopped at, was definitely an exquisite picture. As the sun set, the sunset fell on his body, gilding his tall and slender silhouette with a faint layer of golden light. He was as elegant as a god. Muyaja walked closer and took Yue Yao from her arms. At this moment, Yue Yao was already quietly asleep. Her eyes were closed, like a sleeping little angel. He looked at her with a gentle expression. She snuggled up to him. The quiet scene shocked the photographer at the wedding. He immediately raised his camera and aimed it at this scene, taking a picture of this beautiful moment. "The sunset is so beautiful." The photographer looked at the photo in the camera and suggested with a smile, "Why don't we take a family photo together?" When Yu heard this, she clapped her hands and felt that this suggestion was not bad. Good. Family photo. Daddy, let's take a family photo together." Muyaja and Yin Shishir looked at each other and nodded. Under the shade of the tree, the sunset was mottled. Yin Shishir and Muyaja stood in the middle, holding Yue Yao in their arms. Beside them, Hua Jin and Gong Jia were holding Xiao-Chin and Yu respectively. They looked at the camera with smiles on their faces. 1, 2, 3, smile. The photographer asked, "Is our bride-to-be beautiful?" Everyone said in unison, "Beautiful." Yin Shishir was sandwiched in the middle. She couldn't help but blush. She looked at the camera and smiled shyly. The photographer made an okay gesture and showed the photo to them. When Yin Shishir saw that Muyaja didn't look at the camera, she couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you going to look at it?" "No need." Muyaja hugged her shoulders and bowed his head. "I just want to look at you more." Yin Shishir looked at him, and the smile at the corner of her mouth became even brighter, because she knew that her happiness wasn't over yet. Chapter 3080. Quote, "At the end of the day, blood ties are a very strange thing. It could bind two people together tightly, and it was the most intimate bond. But it can also mercilessly create an insurmountable gap between them. When I was young, I used to be glad that I had a brother like Dongyu who doted on me. I used to think that I was the happiest girl in the world. When I grew up, I hated that the man I loved so much that I couldn't extricate myself from had the same blood flowing in his veins along the way. From ignorant feelings to immature feelings to a strong desire to be together forever until we were forcibly separated by the world. How far is forever? In a single thought, eternity is eternal. One wrong thought, and every step will lead to death. Dongyu, do you know that even though the world is so big, I have nowhere to go and no one to rely on? Whether it's God or anyone else, who can explain to me what love is? If no one can explain it clearly, then why can't I fall in love with Dongyu? This is a question that I still can't solve after leaving home for so long. For so many years, I've been searching for a balance between love and Dongyu, until I received the sudden news of my marriage. Xiaochuan, let me tell you a piece of good news. Your brother is getting married. When are you coming back for a gathering? Over the phone, my father's voice sounded weathered and uneasy. He chose his words carefully. Come home. Everyone misses you. Your mother and I, and your brother. Everyone misses you. At that moment, my breathing stopped. It was really like a boom. My mind went blank, and there was nothing left. This news, which made the whole family immerse in joy, suddenly threw me into eternal hell. Holding the receiver tightly, I was silent for a long time. Then, I tried my best to suppress my trembling voice and said calmly, Okay. After hanging up the call, I realized that the back of my hand was already sweaty. Father said, Come home. But that was home, and yet it wasn't home. I never thought that reality would be so cruel. It was so cruel that one look at heaven and one look at hell. I used to think of him as my entire world, but I didn't expect this warm world to suddenly collapse like a cloud. And it came so suddenly. Asterisk, 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 asterisk the next day, I booked a flight back to China. I knew that returning home this time was definitely not a wise choice. After waiting for such a long time, I thought that even if I were to give up, I should at least be more thorough. Let me see him with my own eyes. If he is really happy, then I should try to let go of this unforgettable relationship. The moment I got off the plane, I felt a lump in my throat. Looking at the crowd in front of me, I felt a stabbing pain in my heart and tears welled up in my eyes. I walked through the crowd with great difficulty, but my footsteps were very slow. Every step I took, I would stop, and from time to time, I would brush past strangers. I still remember that 8 years ago, when I left this city with a heart filled with despair, it was the same scene. Travelers who were in a hurry, loved ones who left dejectedly. At that time, when they looked back before they left, everything within their sight seemed to be dyed with a layer of desolate gray, no longer having any color. Chapter 3081. Now that I was stepping foot on this land again, the city seemed to have changed a lot. The airport had been rebuilt, and the interior decoration was new. It looked very grand. Her ears were filled with the thick Beijing accent of her hometown. Although it was a long time since she had last heard it and was unfamiliar with it, she felt very warm in her heart. I was back. After 8 years, I was stepping foot on this land again. However, in my heart, there was a little uneasiness, but more than that, there was a deep sadness in my heart. My mother had been waiting at the airport for a long time and had arrived early. She must have specially dressed up when she found out that I was coming back. After 8 years, when the mother and daughter met again, they didn't hug each other warmly like normal people. They only stood quietly and looked at each other. There was alienation and estrangement in their eyes. I think she must have sadly discovered the fleeting coldness in my eyes. From her face, it wasn't hard to see how much she wanted to go forward and hug me tightly. She wanted to tell me how much she missed me as a mother for the past 8 years. How she wanted to tell me how worried my family had been about me since I had been away for so long. Maybe she regretted what she did 8 years ago, I thought. However, all the words were stuck in her throat under my cold gaze. There are thousands of words, but she couldn't say them. Mom, I'm back. Amidst the noise, I smiled and broke the awkward silence between us. Only then did my mother come back to her senses. The corners of her mouth twitched with some difficulty. She laughed dryly and muttered, It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. As she spoke, she felt a little uneasy. As if to ease the awkwardness, she hurried forward to help me carry my luggage. Out of the corner of my eye, I subconsciously avoided her hand. In a daze, my mother's hand froze. Mom, I'll do it myself. As I said this, there was no change in my expression. I knew that my cold gaze must have made my mother's heart ache a little because I saw a sudden look of pain on her face. I suddenly realized that these 8 years, which was neither a long nor short period of time, seemed to have been like a great flood that washed away the dependence and connection between mother and daughter. Xiaochuan, do you still hate me? 8 years ago, I had no choice but to send you out of the country. I'm doing this for your own good. A smile appeared on my face, but I said nothing. After a long while, I sighed. I know. So you really don't have to explain so much. She gave me a deep look. Shachuan, is the luggage heavy? Let Mom do it for you. Her mother's voice was very soft and even trembled slightly. She said carefully, let me carry it for you. Shachuan, I want to carry your luggage for you. I was bewildered. I lifted my head and saw that she was frowning. Now, she seemed a little humble. I pursed my lips and nodded silently, allowing my mother to take the luggage from me. As we walked out of the airport, my mother tried to hold my hand. This time, I didn't avoid it. Mother's eyes were filled with comfort. Chapter 3082. When he heard that you were coming back, your father was overjoyed. He didn't sleep well last night. He tossed and turned nervously. He kept saying that he was waiting for you to come back today so that he could cook for you. She bought fresh vegetables early in the morning. She's probably still busy at home now. Sitting in the taxi, her mother smiled and chattered. Gradually, she let go of her worries. I smiled but didn't say anything. My gaze was indifferent through the car window. It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. As my mother spoke, in the rearview mirror, the corners of her eyes couldn't help but moisten. However, she secretly wiped away the tears with her fingertips, not wanting me to see them. Mom, I silently looked out the window at the unfamiliar street scene. My eyelids drooped slightly as I interrupted her indifferently. I asked hesitantly, is he all right? She knew who I was talking about, so she fell silent and the smile on her face faded. Dongyu, he has always been thinking about you. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. I vaguely remember that not long after I was born, the first word I could say was brother. The first name I said when I was learning to speak was also his name. Dongyu, for as long as I could remember. The thing that left the deepest impression on me wasn't my mother's gentle whispers, nor my father's broad shoulders, but his warm arms. My name was Shachuan. I was born on the hottest day of summer. His name was Dongyu. He was born during the coldest time of winter. He was my brother, for years older than me. When I was young, my parents were busy with work, and a family of 4 rarely spent time together. At that time, the 2 of us were fostered at my grandmother's house in the countryside, and Dongyu was my greatest support. Dongyu was very good-looking. He had inherited his mother's good looks. He had delicate features and was very handsome, especially his pair of clear black and white eyes. One look at them was enough to make people lose their souls. Therefore, there were many girls who liked Dongyu since he was young. However, perhaps because he was born in winter, Dongyu's personality was a little cold. He had been too distant from other children since he was young. Even his parents were a little distant. This coldness became even more obvious during the rebellious period of his youth. And from the beginning to the end, I was the only one who could freely get close to him. Perhaps it's because we're blood-related, but Dongyu dotes on me to the bone. Even his parents couldn't compare to this kind of love. According to Grandma, when I was born, Dongyu was still very young. He had thin arms and legs, and there wasn't a single ounce of flesh on his arms. However, he was able to carry me steadily and never fell. At that time, after my mother gave birth, she wasn't in good health. Before I was a month old, she asked Grandma to take care of me. Dongyu, on the other hand, followed her silently. He had never been close to anyone since he was young, but he liked to hug me and play with me, calling my nickname over and over again. Chun-chun, Chun-chun. When I cried, he patiently teased me. When I was hungry, he gently coaxed me. At night, it was Dongyu who hugged me and sang nursery rhymes to sleep. Whenever Grandma brought up the past, she would laugh and sigh as she told me how much her brother doted on you. Yes, it really dotes on me. I naively thought that even if Dongyu was the only person in the world who doted on me, I would still be the happiest girl in the world. I remember Grandma mentioning that when I was 1 year old, Dongyu held my little hand and taught me how to walk step by step. Chapter 3083. I was chubby for being raised by my grandmother, and I wore a lot of winter clothes. With great difficulty, I staggered towards him with my arms outstretched. In a moment of carelessness, I fell. Although it wasn't serious, a layer of skin was scraped off my palm. Before I could cry out loud, Dongyu's eyes reddened. He hugged me in a panic. For the first time in my life, I showed an expression other than gentleness and indifference on his face. As I grew older, I could run more steadily and gradually became sturdier. I played with the other children, playing hide-and-seek and catching cicadas. It was truly a frenzy. When I was young, I loved nighttime the most. At that time, we were still young and there were no inhibitions. Every night, Grandma would bathe Dongyu. When I was young, I didn't know shame and would climb into the bathtub with him on all fours. I especially liked to tease him. I would even point at Dongyu's undeveloped little guy and ask Grandma why my brother's part was different from mine. Grandma would always laugh at my teasing. She would scratch the bridge of my nose and laugh at me for being shameless. On the other hand, Dongyu was a little shy, so much so that when I was naked next to him, he froze and didn't dare to move. Grandma would apply the shower gel on us. I liked the refreshing smell, and I liked it even more when I smelled the same as Dongyu's. I was afraid of the dark and didn't like to sleep with Grandma, but I was willing to share a small bed with Dongyu. At night, I would often wrap my little arms and legs around him without restraint, pestering him to play rock, paper, scissors. This boring game became the most interesting pastime. When the moon was high in the sky, I couldn't sleep. I liked to lie beside him, hold my little head, and listen to him sing and tell stories. Dongyu's voice was very pleasant. It was as clear as a wind chime, with a hint of childishness. He gently sang in my ear. At that time, he only knew a few songs, and they were from music class. However, I never got tired of listening to them. Every night in my childhood, I would fall asleep peacefully with this soft song. In my memories of my youth, Dongyu was somewhat bland. He always locked himself in his own world, either doing his homework or reading classics outside of class. He had been taking piano lessons since he was 6 years old. Hence, I often pestered him to teach me how to play the piano. At that time, in the eyes of many children, Dongyu was cold and unapproachable. He was so noble and aloof. Thinking of his background from the city, he was not like these wild children who grew up playing mud and catching frogs in the countryside. His body was clean, and there was a bit of scholarly elegance. This kind of temperament was not something an ordinary child could have. Good etiquette and refined speech were used by many parents as teaching materials for their children. The only thing I remember is that I had a conflict with a boy named Dodo. The two of us wrestled in the yellow sand. I was not his match and was defeated. I was surrounded by other children and sent home. My body was dirty from head to toe, and there were bruises all over my body. My eyes were red and swollen because of the sand that got into my eyes. Chapter 3084. Children are a little pretentious. When I saw Dongyu, my tears, which had stopped, gushed out again. I simply let go of my throat and cried, earth-shattering tears. The more I cried, the more ashen Dongyu's face became. Even his hands, which were holding a towel to wipe me, couldn't help but tremble. I thought that at that time, he must have hated the person who bullied me to the core. At least, I had never seen Dongyu have such a terrifying gaze. It was gloomy and filled with hatred, so much so that his hands were abnormally stiff. "Does it hurt?" he asked tenderly as he wiped me clean. I nodded aggrievedly and pointed pitifully at a few spots on my body. I whimpered and hugged his shoulders tightly, whimpering in silent accusation. Immediately after, I felt a trace of desire on my shoulder. It was affectionate and pitiful. "Don't be afraid." His voice was slightly hoarse. "I'm here. Don't cry." At that moment, my emotions calmed down. After the shower, he applied the ointment on me and instructed me to rest in his bedroom for a while. I was tired from crying, so I fell into a deep sleep soon after. I didn't know how long I'd slept, but in the evening, I was suddenly woken up by a commotion in the living room. Outside the window, the sky had already darkened. I ran to the door and pried open a crack. Through the crack, I could vaguely see the scene in the living room. I seemed to hear Dowdu crying, followed by the endless argument between the adults and Grandma. "Your Dongyu has beaten my son to this state, and you say it's fine? Children's quarrel? How could a child do such a thing? What did my Dowdu do to offend him? Did he have to be so ruthless? Auntie, I'm usually polite to you because you're an old lady. But what's the matter today? No matter what, your family has to give me an explanation." I think your Dongyu usually looks, from my point of view, I could only vaguely make out the outline of Dongyu's thin back. He just stood there quietly, without any explanation or debate. Even in the face of harsh criticism, he never frowned. I was a little frightened and hid in my room, not daring to go out. I just stared blankly at the scene in the living room. After the argument, Dowdu's family left angrily. Grandma frowned and sighed as she turned around. She rubbed her forehead with a headache and asked, Dongyu, why did you hit Dowdu? Dongyu didn't say anything. The old man got anxious and stomped his feet, urging him a few more times. Say something. He remained silent for a long time. Suddenly, he stubbornly raised his small face, and a cold expression appeared on his face. Serves him right. A loud smack was heard. Don't say that. Fighting is wrong. Dongyu, you have to be sensible and apologize. He bullied my sister first. Dongyu said angrily. It's his fault. I'm not wrong. I won't apologize. Grandma was also stunned. After a long pause, she said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, I don't know who you take after. You're so stubborn and unforgiving. After that incident, none of the boys in the village dared to bully me again. They must be extremely afraid of Dongyu. However, to girls, Dongyu always had an indescribable charm. Hence, there were many little girls in the village who admired Dongyu. With more or less selfish motives, they tried to get close to me. Chapter 3085. It's the school holidays. Why don't I see your brother? Xiaochuan, why don't you ask your brother to come out and play? The children surrounded me and pestered me. They didn't even hesitate to give me their pocket money to buy candy for me. I was a little greedy at that time, and after receiving the benefits, I was foolishly bought over. Naturally, I took their words to heart. Hence, after dinner, I pestered Dongyu, who was walking towards the study. Without a word, I dragged him to the square in the village. When I saw Dongyu's expressionless face darkening as he was surrounded by a group of children, I suddenly couldn't feel happy at all. The candy in my mouth became tasteless. For the first time in my life, I tasted sourness in the sweet little Dragon Man candy. Ever since I was young, I had hoped that my brother would play with us. However, when such a day came, I felt awkward. Pushing Dongyu into the middle of the children seemed like a huge mistake. I hated it when other girls tried to hold his hand. I hated it when others tried to get close to him in a very intimate manner. I hated it when those people tried to draw his attention. I suddenly regretted selling Dongyu out for a few pieces of soft candy. As for Dongyu, he didn't seem to like interacting too much with other children. He wasn't like the boys his age, who were full of vigor and vitality. He always exuded an overly calm aura. At the time, I didn't know that there was such a person in the world. He was mature before he even grew up. In his youth, Dongyu didn't seem to be naive. Instead, he protected me under his wings like an adult. On the way home, I silently held Dongyu's hand and held it tightly. After a moment of silence, I opened my mouth unhappily. I said, Dongyu, I don't like you playing with others. Dongyu looked down at me and couldn't help but laugh. You were the one who led me here. I pouted, feeling unhappy. Hence, I started to kick up a fuss. I said, don't play with them anymore, okay? Just play with me. When Dongyu heard this, his eyes curved and the corners of his lips curled into a gentle smile. He pinched my cheek lovingly but didn't answer. But I knew he would listen to me. Every time I thought of this childhood memory, I felt that I was lucky. Life was long, and not everyone could tolerate someone's unreasonable behavior. Among the children, there was a little girl named Menglan who was on good terms with me. She was 3 years older than me. One day, she held my hand and whispered to me, Xiaochuan, when I grow up, I'll be your sister-in-law, okay? I didn't understand and frowned. Sister-in-law, what's a sister-in-law? A sister-in-law means to be your brother's wife and marry him in the future. Marry my brother? I still didn't understand. Yes, just like your father and mother. After you get married, you live together and have children. I stood up and pushed her away coldly. And I'll be together with him in the future. Menglan was pushed to the ground by me. Her face was flushed red, but when she heard my words, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Xiaochuan, you can't be together. You are siblings. My mother said that siblings can't get married. Why? Chapter 3086. In any case, I don't want you to be my sister-in-law. After that, I ran home. I held on to Grandma's hand and kept asking. However, Grandma only thought that I had a deep sibling relationship with Dongyu and treated it as child's talk. Hence, she smiled and said, "All right, if Xiaochuan wants to be with Dongyu, then so be it. In the future, our Xiaochuan will marry Dongyu and be his wife. Grandma will keep her word and make the decision for you." I was relieved to hear this. From then on, because of Dongyu, my relationship with Menglan fell into an ice cellar, and I completely cut off all contact with the other children. Wherever Dongyu went, I followed him like a little tail. At that time, it was as if there was a wall that separated us from the rest of the world. However, every time I dreamed in the middle of the night, Menglan's words echoed in my mind like an oath. I felt indignant and hugged Dongyu's neck tightly until he woke up from his dream. In his sleepy state, he caressed my cheek. "What's wrong? Brother, will you be with another girl in the future?" Menglan said that she wants to marry you in the future and be your wife and my sister-in-law. Under the moonlight, I could vaguely see him frown. The young me was so uneasy. I choked and pleaded, "Brother, I don't want you to get married. I don't want you to be with another girl. Can you be with me? 100 years, a lifetime together." Dongyu didn't speak. After a moment of silence, he hugged me tighter and whispered in my ear, "What if I don't live for 100 years? No matter how many years it takes, we have to be together," I said with a pout. In the darkness, I couldn't see his expression clearly. I only heard him smile. "All right, we'll be together forever." I was overjoyed. I couldn't help but hold his face and kiss his warm, thin lips. Dongyu grabbed my little hand and responded to my pure kiss. It was a tender kiss, just lips against each other. There was no finesse to it, but it stirred my heart. At that time, we were young and had no concept of the relationship between a man and a woman, nor did we understand the meaning of such an intimate kiss. However, until a long, long time later, I still didn't understand why I wanted him so much. I asked myself this question more than once, but there was no answer. Later, I thought, who asked him to spoil me so much? He spoiled me so much that I was out of control. With this kind of spoiling, it seemed that other people's love couldn't be considered love anymore. At the end of the day, I was just a spoiled child. As I grew older, my personality became like Dongyu's for a long time. Gradually, I became cold to others and became not good at socializing. I didn't even like to get close to others. It seemed that only Dongyu could affect my emotions. Whether I was happy or sad, it seemed to only concern him. Slowly, I reached the age of going to school. I went to the same school as Dongyu. I'm in the 1st grade, and he's in the 4th. When I first picked up the textbook and smelled the fragrance of the books, I felt like I had been locked in a huge cage, and the world before me was gray. I was surrounded by an unfamiliar environment, unfamiliar people, unfamiliar faces, and unfamiliar voices. Without Dongyu, I became unhappy. I became depressed. I even ignored the friendliness of my classmates. I didn't even want to talk to them. Chapter 3087. Thinking back to those years, throughout my entire academic life, I must have been a very reclusive person in the eyes of my classmates. After such a long time, I've long gotten used to the world of the two of us. It's probably because I've been used to spending time with Dongyu since I was young. Without him by my side, whenever a stranger invades, I subconsciously arm myself. During that period of youth, I was too quiet in class. During class, I would look down at my textbook. After class, I would look out the window. Amidst the noisy fighting, I would stare silently at the window in a daze. On the 2nd floor of the opposite building was Dongyu's classroom, which was opposite my class. Dongyu would also lean against the windowsill and quietly look at me. Even if we couldn't talk, we still enjoyed it. Hence, the few minutes of break between classes became the time I yearned for the most. The day's classes became the most unbearable sea for me. Hence, when the school bell rang, I suddenly felt alive and beautiful. The 4th grade class often ended very late, and mine ended early. Hence, I liked to tiptoe and lean against the windowsill, shaking my head as I waited for him. Over time, the people in Dongyu's class became familiar with me and would even tease me. Sometimes, when I got bored of waiting, I would do somersaults in the corridor outside the classroom. I even did a handstand. I would often fall and knock my head, but I never got tired of it. However, I didn't want to make Dongyu anxious. Every time I fell while doing a handstand, he would immediately stand up. Once, when I went overboard, the teacher rushed out aggressively with a ruler. He pointed at me and lectured. "Which class's child is so restless? We're still in class. Hurry up and go home." I was stunned by the scolding. Pinching the corner of my shirt, I said aggrievedly, "Teacher, I'm waiting for my brother to go home." The teacher turned to look inside the classroom and asked angrily in a low voice, "What's your brother's name?" I immediately shut my mouth, not wanting to betray Dongyu. However, a thin figure stood up quietly near the window. "Teacher Shui, she's my sister." Dongyu's tone was calm and unruffled. Teacher Shui's teaching style was famous in town for being strict and dignified. At that time, there was no such thing as a harmonious teacher-student relationship. Corporal punishment was common. Naturally, Dongyu didn't end well for himself. Teacher Shui swung the ruler and slapped him hard on the shoulder a few times, then punished him by making him stand at the door of the classroom. His school bag was also mercilessly thrown out, but he was not allowed to pick it up. I had never seen such a detestable teacher. I was dumbfounded. I stared blankly at the books all over the floor and cried out in sadness. Dongyu looked at me and laughed helplessly, pretending not to care. "I'm bored in class. Your homeroom teacher is so fierce." I secretly spoke ill of his teacher. He smiled and said, "The senior students have to change their form teacher. If you're not paying attention in class, you'll be punished severely." I was scared and shrunk my shoulders. After class, the students filed out. Some of them didn't pay attention to their feet and stepped on Dongyu's textbook until the pages were torn. Only a few girls carefully moved the textbook away from the teacher's sight. Without old Shui's approval, no one dared to help. Chapter 3088. At the time, I didn't know that his shoulder had already been bruised by those few strokes. I just cried silently. There was frustration, hatred for old Shui, and heartache for Dongyu. After that incident, I didn't go to his class to disturb him again. Instead, I waited obediently at the school gate for his class to end. I thought that after that, without me causing a ruckus at the entrance of Dongyu's class, it must have been much quieter. Since he was young, Dongyu had been very popular with girls. This phenomenon didn't change even when he was in school. However, he wasn't close to girls, and his daily interactions with them were distant. However, perhaps it was his cold aura that attracted many girls to him. Or perhaps, in terms of appearance, he was especially outstanding in school. His handsome face was indeed an asset. He often received a table full of gifts and love letters, as well as cards that were popular at the time. Those girls were especially interesting. Apart from the love letters with delicate handwriting, there were also pencils, erasers, rulers, compasses, drawing boards. There were even comic books, cartoon cards, toys, and all kinds of strange gifts. Most of the time, Dongyu contributed them to the rubbish bin. Sometimes, when I realized that there was something I was particularly interested in among the gifts and wanted to take it, Dongyu would stop me and willingly throw it away. I was a little puzzled. "Since they gave it to you, why did you throw it away?" Dongyu smiled and replied lightly, "If I don't throw it away, I'm afraid of being misunderstood." I didn't really understand what he meant. Every time after school, I would wait for him at the school gate to go home together, regardless of whether it was morning or evening. When we got home, I would often pester him to carry me on his back. He would never refuse. Every time this happened, he would lovingly scratch my nose and squat down. "Come on up, little sloth." I happily lay on his back and hugged his shoulders. I felt so smug that it was as if I was sitting on a hydrogen balloon and flying high into the sky. Just as he said, I was famous for being a little sloth. When I got home from school, I threw my bag on the bed and lay on the sofa. I stretched my limbs and refused to move. I didn't like to study, nor was I good at schoolwork. Homework was even more of a headache. Hence, when I couldn't finish my homework every day, he could only do it for me. He was angry and helpless at the same time. He asked me, "Will I still have to worry about my homework when I enter university?" Coming back to the topic, he smiled again and said, "I think with my level, I might not be able to go to university. I pouted and changed the topic. Brother, don't you want to go to a university? No, no. Now is not the time to think about university aspirations. I imitated his tone and said, it's not the time for you to worry about whether I can get into university or not. Dongyu was stunned by my words. After a long while, he stroked my head. Yes, yes, eldest miss. But in reality, I'm not stupid. I'm just not motivated. Or maybe at that time, I didn't have a heart to study and my head was full of playful thoughts, but I didn't fall behind in my homework. Because when Dongyu was doing my homework for me, I was always by his side. As I watched, I got the gist of it. His favorite childhood season was summer, especially during the summer holidays. Chapter 3089. In the fields and wheat fields, I always found a way to exhaust my energy. Finally, as the sun set, I reluctantly took Dongyu's hand and set off home. Dongyu and I each had a bicycle. Dongyu's bicycle was a giant given to him by his father on his 11th birthday. At that time, it cost a few hundred yuan each. Ordinary people would shrink back at such a price. As for my ride, it was the one Dongyu rode when he was young. There were two small wheels on both sides of the rear wheel to balance it out. When I was riding it, my father removed the two small wheels. After cleaning them, they looked like new again. Look, each of us has a bicycle. Xiaochuan, haven't you been clamoring for a bicycle? Here, I'll let you ride Dongyu's bicycle, okay? Sure. I didn't feel aggrieved at all. Instead, I treated Dongyu's bicycle like a treasure. During the summer vacation, he and I would each have a bicycle. Under the scorching sun, we would ride our bicycles in the wind. The other children were envious of us. At that time, as we rode our bicycles, a group of children chased after us enviously, looking at us curiously. It felt so good. Everyone liked the feeling of being envied and yearned for. Especially as Dongyu's younger sister, I felt a sense of self-satisfaction. When we got hot from riding, we would park the bicycle at home. The two of us would hold hands and go to the small supermarket in town to buy a popsicle. We didn't spend much every day. 2 yuan was just enough for each of us to buy a popsicle. However, I was a greedy little cat. When I came across something I liked, I ate it especially quickly. In no time, I had licked the popsicle clean. At this point, Dongyu had only taken a bite out of the popsicle in his hand. Every time this happened, I would put on an aggrieved expression and look at him eagerly, staring at the popsicle in his hand. Why did you eat it so quickly? Because I'm afraid it'll melt. Dongyu would always be amused by my various excuses. Hence, the two of us shared a popsicle. You took a bite, I took a bite, and his popsicle was completely digested. The days of youth were always nostalgic. At that time, I never thought that such a carefree life would quietly change after Dongyu was admitted to junior high school. Dongyu and I went to primary school in our hometown. Back then, family planning was prevalent. My birth was outside the system. With Dongyu, there shouldn't be me. My existence is entirely due to an accident. When Dongyu was 2 years old, perhaps my parents couldn't help themselves and accidentally gave birth to me. Logically speaking, they should have aborted me, but my mother couldn't bear to do it. After all, I was her own flesh and blood. Hence, after much discussion, she ran back to the countryside and secretly gave birth to me. When she was pregnant, my mother had a big belly and had to hide from place to place. After giving birth to me, she hid me in my grandmother's house. In order to avoid the Family Planning Commission, I didn't register until later and was eligible to enroll. Even so, his family still paid a hefty price. Later, Dongyu graduated from primary school. In the year of his junior high school entrance examination, Dongyu lived up to everyone's expectations and got into a key junior high school in the city. Chapter 3090. It was my first time stepping into a brand new apartment building. It was my first time seeing an elevator. The small but exquisite 3 rooms and 2 living rooms were filled with novelty. I felt uneasy and uneasy, but at the same time, I felt an inexplicable sense of anticipation. This way, the family of 4 could be reunited. When I was in primary school, although my parents often came back, they weren't always by my side, so it was inevitable that we would feel distant. But everything in the city was new. After moving to the city, I quickly got used to it. But the only thing I wasn't used to was Dongyu and I were sleeping in separate rooms. Dongyu, you're all grown up. You're going to be a big boy soon. You can't sleep with your sister anymore. Mother lectured us seriously. In the past, it might not have been a big deal for you to sleep in the same bed. But now, Dongyu is in junior high school and is already 13 years old. You're 10 years old. It's time to try to be independent. Chun-chun, you'll sleep alone in your room tonight. It was almost an order, and there was no room for refusal. I looked at her blankly, uneasy about sleeping alone. I don't want to. I immediately shook my head like a broken drum and hugged Dongyu tightly, refusing to let go. I don't want to sleep in separate rooms from my brother. This is outrageous. Father muttered at the side. He's not a child anymore. Dongyu is already so old. How can he keep sleeping in the same bed as you? What does that look like? At that time, I didn't understand why they had to split us up this way. Because back in my hometown, Dongyu and I had always slept in the same bed and slept on the same bed. I was used to sleeping with him in my arms. I definitely wasn't used to sleeping alone. But how would I know then? Dongyu was 13 years old, at the age of puberty. This puberty didn't just refer to the development of height, weight, and vocal cords. It was the most important part of a teenager's development, sexual development. My understanding of this was zero. Hence, I didn't understand why Mother was so insistent on sleeping in separate rooms. On the night we slept in separate rooms, I lay on the bed, hugging the blanket, but tears kept falling. My imagination was surprisingly rich. Without Dongyu by my side, I couldn't help but let my imagination run wild. I kept having the feeling that there was a face outside the window and a person hiding under the bed. Outside the crack in the door, there seemed to be someone eyeing us covetously. It was as if he was besieged on all sides. Trapped in the fear of the dark night, I didn't even dare to stretch my feet out of the bed. I was afraid that there would be a hand under the bed that would grab my feet at any moment and drag me into the endless abyss of hell. In the end, I cried, feeling wronged. I muttered to myself, "Why is my mother so cruel? So cruel?" Then, he fell asleep in a daze. The next few days were even more miserable. Before going to bed, after my mother left, I couldn't wait to turn on the lights. It was as if the strange, evil spirits would retreat as soon as I turned on the lights. I don't know where such a stupid idea came from. The world of children is always so naive. Of course, turning on